Mr. Fark would like to introduce Mr. Post.
Yes. Mayor Borman, members of council, esteemed members of the gallery, and the press.
And the press, not so esteemed.
So before we get the meeting underway, I would like to introduce Mr. Lee Provost. Lee has joined the town. He is our new planning and development supervisor. So he replaced Mr. Sorfleet. His first day was yesterday. And since he will be before you early and often, I thought it was a good opportunity for you to become familiar with him.
Thank you.
Well, if you'd like to say a few words, that's fine. Otherwise, don't want to put you on the spot, but
You'll probably never want to ask me to do that again because I tend to be long-winded. Just a little bit about me. I'm from the city of Calgary. I've been developing affordable housing for the city for the last 5 years. So I'm very interested in that portfolio, but I've been lucky enough to participate in a whole lot of development and planning approvals in Calgary. So I feel very welcome here today, and thanks for this quick introduction.
well, it's a pleasure to welcome you to the town of Canmore at this time and help to fill out some empty spots in the planning department. Of course, you will have large boots to fill with the farewell of Mr. Sorfleet recently, but great team to work with. Planning is #1 in my books. So,
And he has already been given his first
well,
homework
just,
assignments.
next to the nice.
Communications, or
We'll-
engineering.
We'll talk about that. Yeah. We can talk about that later, Ms. Hyde. She's sitting there with chocolate and hasn't offered any to council. So just before calling the meeting to order, the public question period, members of the public with questions. Ms. Hillstad, it's been a while since we've seen you in this chamber.
Normally I'm not on this side, but
Yeah, well,
anyways.
how's it feel over there?
So thank you so much, Council and Mayor, for having a question period. I am just here today to ask some questions regarding the campaign signs that is on your agenda this evening. So I had a question for you. How important is name recognition in a municipal election?
I'm sorry, I missed that.
How important is name recognition in a municipal election?
That's a question.
That's a question.
Good question. The answer is I don't really know.
Okay. All right, and this is for everyone on council, is how many of you put up signs on public property during the past campaign? Show of hands would be great.
I think we all did.
Okay, all right, and again, this is another question, but what was your motivation for doing so? And again, I don't know.
Well, I guess because that's how you campaign.
Okay, and so my final question, so I'm not going to take too long, is what is most important to this council? Aesthetics, not allowing campaign signs on public property for 4 weeks every 4 years, or a political process that fosters an awareness of who the candidates are in the municipal election and any election, because I believe this also would also extend to provincial and federal elections as well?
So is that a question?
That's a question.
What was the question?
Well, first, will this also apply to provincial and federal elections?
Not sure if we can dictate to the provincial, but yes, I'm saying, depends on, there'll be a discussion later, and if council's supportive of the direction, then administration will come back at some point with recommendations. But first, admin, as you know from the agenda, just wants to know if council's even interested in that discussion.
And so I guess, and then my final question is, when you're considering this question that's before you tonight, later on this evening, I'm just asking you what's most important to this council to keep in mind. Is it aesthetics? So, not any campaign signs on public property for 4 weeks every 4 years, or a democratic political process that fosters an awareness of who the candidates are in the municipal election or any election, and also that we're actually having an election, which might be a daily reminder for some to encourage them to participate in that process. So that's a rhetorical question. I don't expect you to answer.
It's not much of a question, actually,
Yeah.
but that's okay. Thank
Okay.
you.
And that's all. So
Beauty.
just consider that. Thank
And
you.
if you don't find yourself able to stay through the meeting to that point, you're always able to watch it later on off our website. Thank you. No other members of the public with questions? In which case then I'll call the meeting to order and look into the agenda. Are there changes, additions? Move the agenda be approved as presented then. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. We have one delegation here this evening. Mr. Meyer.
Thank you.
The podium is yours.
Well, thank you. Can I take it with me?
No?
Well, thank you very much, Mayor Borman and Council, for giving us a few minutes of your time, and we'll be very mindful of your time so that we can tell you a little bit about the IPC World Cup, Para-Nordic World Cup that we're planning for this coming December. By way of introduction, I'm Norbert Meyer, President of the Alberta World Cup Society, and I think we've chatted on a number of occasions, so I won't go into the details of my background and so on, but
And your lovely
also want to
assistant?
introduce Carly Lewis, and there we are.
I recognize a few of you, but I worked also on the 2016 ski tour and also on the Biathlon World Cup as well. And just recently, I just finished with the Speed Skating World Championships in Calgary. But this will be my first para event, so I'm really excited about that one.
And we're happy to have Carly be the organizing committee chair. The Para-Nordic World Cup is an important event for us as the Alberta World Cup Society. Our goal is to host World Cups here in cross-country skiing every few years, whether it's able-bodied or para. And in doing that, we're operating under the auspices of the international governing body, the International Paralympic Committee. And so the event is delivered and executed to their standards. In other words, the highest standards in the world of skiing for para-sport. And there's a number of details around para-sport that are very different, and it has to do with the level of disability and classification around those things. And so we work under the auspices and within the regulations and rules of the IPC. And this is a little bit different than a Nordic cross-country ski event because it includes both cross-country skiing and biathlon. And many of the athletes do both. So Carly is going to tell you a lot more about the event.
So, as you can see, we have 6 races held over a 10-day period, so it's a long event in comparison to the 2 World Cups that we just hosted in 2016. We expect about 120 athletes, and then, of course, their entourage of coaches and staff, which will total another 80 people. And then for that, we require about 70 volunteers and officials. As you know, we are very lucky to have a very strong network of volunteers in Canmore who want to be involved with these events and are always clamoring to be involved with these events. That said, it's a long event. It's 10 days, a lot of weekday races. So we have that challenge as well to always be accommodating for our volunteers as well. And of course, as you can see, $300,000 budget, much smaller than the ski tour that we were presenting in front of you. But that said, it's a smaller event in budget and in scale, but it's just as important. And that's because the athletes, this will be their event only 3 months before the 2018 Paralympic Winter Games in Korea. So it's an important stepping stone for them because they'll accrue World Cup points when they come to this event, and that will determine their ranking and placing as they go into the Olympics. So as much as it's exciting for those athletes because they're using this to accrue points, it's also exciting for them because they, especially our Canadian athletes, to have the chance to compete at home. That's an unprecedented opportunity for them to have this opportunity so close to the Korea Olympics. So we hope to see that translating then into our athletes qualifying and doing well in Korea. And it's also an exciting opportunity for those athletes to then inspire the next generation of Paralympic athletes here in Canmore and in Calgary. We want to create that opportunity for as many young spectators as we can. And the way that we do that is we create community-based activities that are in addition to the races. So typically we've done an opening ceremonies where we welcome the athletes, announce the team, have some local entertainment. We have a welcome reception for all of our dignitaries, and we use town facilities around Canmore to do that so that we can show off the town and we can show everyone around town. We have a final banquet that we're already planning to have at the Cornerstone Theatre, for example.
So from our perspective, this is a very significant event. It maybe a smaller footprint or smaller in terms of the actual numbers, but anytime we can host a World Cup event, we think it's a significant one. Our pattern of practice now includes measuring the economic impact of each event that we host. And so part of our budget includes resources for measuring that impact. And of course, we want the world to know about it, not just the event, but the community that it's held in. And as much as it's one event, it's also part of a track record and a growing of the capacity that our community has to host events of this type.
Just before we move on, I just have to say I love the piece that is being given to the athlete there.
It's a beautiful piece of ceramic produced locally.
Yeah. I thought as much.
I think the presenter is a pretty upstanding citizen of the community. All kidding aside, the person who's getting the award is Mark Ahrens. And for us, this is very significant because it wasn't that long ago that the Canadian Paralympic team in cross-country skiing was one person, Brian McKeever. And now through Brian's profile and effort and the athlete recruitment efforts of Cross-Country Alberta and Cross-Country Canada, we have a broader-based team. And this year we had more para-athletes winning medals at the World Championships and the World Cups than ever for Canada. So it's an indication of how World Cup events and how athlete development go hand in hand. And so it's an important part of what we believe we can do in raising the profile of our sport. So the planning process, it typically starts with a contract with the governing body and understanding what obligations we have and what opportunities we have. We obviously go out and raise money for it, and we were just informed last week of the provincial government's full support of what we've asked for, so we're thrilled about that. And then, of course, there are a number of key volunteers that come into play and really make the event happen for us.
So in addition to that, we're trying to make connections in the community so that we can reach out not only in Canmore but also across the province. So one of the organizations that we've connected with is Rocky Mountain Adaptive. So they're a charitable organization you might be familiar with here in Canmore. And we want to connect with them and see how we can use this event to help them. And of course they can help us too. We want them to bring spectators and support to our event, but in the long term we'd like to see our event help them to grow as well. And then we want to do the same thing and connect with the similar adaptive organizations across Alberta. So we were just at the Adaptive Symposium, Adaptive Sports Symposium at Mount Royal University a few weeks ago, and that was a good starting point for us to start connecting with those adaptive organizations that are spread out across the province.
One of the special things about this event is Canada has been awarded the 2019 World Championships in Para-Nordic sport. And so that's in Prince George. Our event here in December 17 is actually considered a test event for the Prince George team. And so they have a good track record in hosting able-bodied events. So it's not about hosting a cross-country ski race. It's about hosting an IPC event. And so the leaders of the Prince George team are joining our team and becoming the assistants to all of the leadership positions. So we will have our team in place, and each one of those leaders will have a Prince George counterpart shadowing them and helping out and taking over at times. So we feel very privileged in a way that we were asked to help the Prince George people understand what an IPC event is, and that we'll be working together as a team for this event. So it's a unique opportunity, and it's a great way to share the expertise that our volunteers have, and hopefully will contribute something to the success of the 2019 event in Prince George.
So transportation, accommodation, accessibility, those are issues for every World Cup that we host. And then in addition to this one, we'll have some additional accessibility challenges. So for example, we'd like to be able to have wheelchair accessible shuttles that can take the athletes from their hotels up to the Nordic Centre. And then we need to make sure that once they arrive at the Nordic Centre, they have accessible wax cabins and accessible parking and things like that. So those are considerations that we put into our planning process and we work through. It's the same for any additional events. So is the Cornerstone Theatre accessible? Can they get in? Are the accommodations accessible? We have a very limited amount of wheelchair accessible hotel rooms in Canmore. So that will be a challenge in our planning in terms of who gets those rooms.
And, there are a number of other adaptations we make, and typically up at the Nordic Centre, the able-bodied World Cups are just not, World Cup trails are not suited for para-athletes, and so we use a combination of public trails, 1988 trails, and current World Cup trails to configure the race courses that are acceptable, as there are elevation gain restrictions and cornering restrictions and so on. So this is, it's been great working with the Nordic Centre. We did that in 2013. We'll do it again. And those are the normal adaptations that you end up making to a facility like what we have. Don't want to dwell on this slide too terribly much, except to say we will be looking for sponsorship, of course. We look for not just the good corporate citizens, but also community development partners, suppliers, and vendors. It's a very specialized field. It's somewhat opaque in areas because able-bodied people don't typically know what it's like to go into the disabled world and look for the key stakeholders there. But we'll speak a little bit later about our goals. One of them is to create a presence and a profile for the event, and so that's media.
Yeah, so I'll just touch, should I talk to you guys while I'm saying this? Of course, creating media interest for an event like this is always a challenge for us, but it's even more of a challenge when it's a smaller event in scale, and it's just that much further out of Calgary, so we sometimes have trouble getting that Calgary interest. The lucky thing for us is we have a few things going for us. One, it's right before the Olympics. Two, our Canadian athletes are doing very well, and we always find that when we can put a face to the event, that always connects people to the event a little bit more. Three, because of the ski tour, we've gained an audience and a following with the Alberta World Cup Society, so we'll be using those channels to really promote the event within town. And then, of course, we'll be chasing the media attention as well. And again, just to reinforce what Norbert mentioned there, one of our main goals for the event is going to be increasing the spectator numbers and getting spectators excited about this. And we really want there to be a buzz in town the same way that there was for the ski tour and the same way there was for Biathlon World Cup.
So our goals are to not just host a great set of ski races, but to create an audience, to create a following, to have people on the side of the race course cheering, and to create a profile for the event. Obviously, that also creates a profile for our community and for Canmore as a host of an event like this. But when we look at what are we really after here, we're after creating an audience and putting spectators on the side of the race course, creating a following in social media. Those are the things that start to create value in the event for us, and that's very important. The buzz in town that Carly mentioned is very important to us. We want the community talking about the event, and so there are a number of things we want to try and do about that as well, which is then to the bottom line of what are we asking for and what would we like from you. First and foremost, we would love your endorsement of the event. We would love for council to be able to say this is the right thing for us to be doing in Canmore, it's the right time, and it's the right kind of event. I think beyond that, we're looking for support. In VIK terms, this is all at the bottom of the one-pager that we gave you. And I don't know if you want to speak to that first, but it's basically we would like your endorsement of the event and your enabling of the town administration to support what it is we're trying to do.
Yeah, and in terms of VIK and financial support that we're asking for, we will be going through the new community grant program that you've just released. So we're in the process of filling out that application right now. And then in addition to that funding, we are looking for more facility VIK. So for example, we've often used the Civic Center for our opening ceremonies. We would love to be able to do that again. We like being able to bring the event downtown and put it in front of people because we find that it works so much better for getting that buzz around town and creating that attention. We host a welcome reception, and that can be in any Canmore facility. So if that's something that is of interest to Town of Canmore to promote a certain building, for example, then we are happy to adjust our activities and our ceremonies to those places. But then the other thing that we're looking for is marketing support. So this event will overlap with Christmas in Canmore. So we're hoping to, again, tie our event to those activities, the same way that we did for the Biathlon and Cross Country World Cup, but of course on a much smaller scale than that one was. And then any sort of advertising support. So in the past, we've linked up with Town of Canmore to do ads in the Rocky Mountain Outlook or social media ads. Any kind of advertising support that we can find through your marketing department is something that we're looking for as well. Do you want to speak to Rome?
Yeah, and we're asking for help in regards to Rome. We'll approach the Transit Commission directly. We'll approach Rome directly. We have not just special needs, but we have an audience that hopefully will be large and also has special needs. So it's not just the teens getting to the Nordic Center, it's the audience getting up to the Nordic Center. And because it spans 10 days, what we'll be asking the Commission for is to expand their service, not just to go between the weekends and cover the whole week. And so we would love to get your support in our request to the Commission to say, we would like your service to be expanded during this period of time to cover the whole week, not just the weekends of service to the Nordic Center, and then to have a special emphasis on accessible transportation for that entire period of time. We'll obviously also be making a financial request of the Commission, but we will articulate that to them directly. So what we would ask of you is to assist us in that process. We know you have representation on the Commission, and we'd love to be able to get your support in doing that. So thank you. Thanks for listening to what we have to say and what we're trying to accomplish. And again, we've enjoyed working with the town and town administration in every World Cup we've had in the past, and we'll continue doing that. But we appreciate your support.
Super. Well, appreciate that you could be here to give us a bit of a overview of what's being planned, and it's a good way to begin to get the exposure in the community through our helpers over there, the media. Pretty sure it's the media. There's a name tag on the desk, but oh yes, it is the media. So it's great to be here, and I appreciate that you'll be working through the new special event grant funding process. So that's good. I've always enjoyed all of those events when they have some ceremonial aspect that happens here at Civic Center particularly, and certainly we'll be able to talk about other opportunities when you talk about the opening ceremony and all. Just curious, you did note that you have entertainment lined up for the visiting dignitaries at the opening ceremonies, and you often invite council to that opening ceremony. So are we actually the entertainment? Is that?
You could be. Do you have any hidden talents that we don't know about?
We're open to that suggestion.
Yeah, okay.
We haven't booked anybody else yet.
Councillor Sanford, do you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. Thank you for your presentation. I did attend the last one you had here, and it was really fantastic, and I know how much the athletes enjoyed it, and the spectators as well. I was one of the spectators, so. I'm just wondering if you are going to have a pageantry committee, or you're asking for the use of town facilities, but are you also going to package the ceremonies yourselves and run the ceremonies yourselves through the organization?
Yes, absolutely. We would run the ceremonies definitely. In terms of pageantry, I'm not quite sure where that stands with Canmore Business and Tourism. I think put those signs up for us in the past. So for example, along Main Street, those signs. We would love to do that again if we had the opportunity to, but we're just not quite sure where that stands now. So.
Yeah, so if you're asking for value in kind, it would be interesting to know sort of how much of the entertainment, et cetera, that you're able to do with the funding that you receive from the town. Because I know there was one World Cup where everything was basically done on site here, and the town had very little participation in that. So there was a funding process that people used, but I'm not sure which one it was. If it was the IPC one or if it was the one before that. There's been a number of them and a number.
The 2012 able-bodied World Cup, the FIS World Cup in December 2012.
Yeah, it was in December, right? So there's been a number of different formulas that have been used, and it would be interesting to see what it ends up that you are able to do with the funding through your organization.
Yeah, and I think the answer is we would love to work with you on what that looks like. So whether or not that means you want us to take on the whole ceremonies and do everything and we just use the town venue, we're happy to do that. But if it's something that you want your marketing team to also be involved with, and for example with the pageantry, then of course we're happy to have that as well.
Okay, great, thanks.
And those kind of things, of course, you would want to work directly with admin, and I expect they'd rather not have to do any of the actual work because they're kind of already overworked, but those are conversations you can have with admin when the time comes. But thanks very much for being here. As I say, it's great to get this out and talked about for information.
Thank you.
Look forward to it. It's time then, looking to the minutes of the meeting of Tuesday, March 21st. Are there any errors or omissions? Councillor Krausert.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just noticed that on motion 89-2017, it should be noted that it was carried with those who were in favor.
Beg your pardon?
89-2017.
Right.
It doesn't say that it was carried and who was in favor.
Yeah. Any other errors or omissions? Seeing none, I'll move the minutes be adopted as amended. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. Moving then to item F1, Bylaw 2016-28, 7th Street and 7th Avenue Direct Control District Amendment Bylaw. Mr. Henry. I guess the whole planning department's wearing ties today, huh?
Yeah, it seems to be the trend, doesn't it?
The city people.
Keep in mind.
Mr. Fish isn't here though, so he would have spoiled your perfect score.
Okay. Great. Thank you for having me again. As you're aware, I'm here to discuss the potential redevelopment of the corner of 7th Street and 7th Ave. I'm just right adjacent to the town center. So this site is currently home to the Our Lady of Paris Church, the associated parking lot, and one single family, it's called detached dwelling, which is located right here. The size of this site is 0.245 hectares, which would be the equivalent of about 4 of the R4 residential lot sizes. The proposed district would allow for a medium, it's called density residential building, which would, which would allow for a maximum build of about 40 units. 10% of that would be as perpetual affordable housing, and it's called the max building height would be around 14.5 meters. So looking at the proposed, it's called the mix of density and unit, it's called types. We see here there would be a range in unit types from like 1 to 4 bedroom units. It's called the mass majority of units for this development would likely fall within that 2 to 3 bedroom unit type. What you're seeing here with regards to PAH located here in the corner, they're currently showing that the PAH would likely come in the form of a 1 bedroom or a 2 bedroom. However, if you look at the district bylaw within the staff report, the applicant has indicated that they are willing to work with CMHC at the time of the development permit to make sure that the units provided are actually what's in demand.
CCHC, not CMHC.
Yeah, sorry, CCHC. My apologies.
It's okay. I wish we were working with CMHC a little more closely.
When you compare this to the existing R4 district on site, what you would see is with the R4 district, you would get a minimum of 12 units on site with a maximum of 24 units. What we're seeing in the DC district, which is being proposed, would be a minimum of 12, but what we're seeing is a maximum of 40 units. So the density would increase quite significantly in that regard. Looking at the parking requirements for the sites, as you can see here in the table, how the variation in parking mainly stems around 2, 3, and 4 bedroom units. When you compare it to land use bylaw requirements, we're seeing, on average, a decrease in parking requirements of 0.25 stalls, with the exception of the 3-bedroom perpetual affordable housing unit, which would go from a 2-stall requirement to 1.5. Keeping that in mind, the bicycle parking for this development is significantly increasing in comparison to land use bylaw. So with land use bylaw, the requirement is 1 bike stall per 5 vehicle stalls. The applicant is actually willing to provide 1 stall per unit. So when you're looking at the overall requirement here, for like the bicycle stalls, we're looking at 40 stalls at like a max build out in comparison to a land use bylaw requirement, which would be 14. When looking at the vehicle requirements from the land use bylaw requirements, we would be looking at 67 stalls. For the DC district with the proposed amendments, we'd be looking at 60 stalls. The parking for this development will actually be all underground. And within the parking, we will see like a secured lockup facility for the bike stalls. The exact amount that would be in there to be determined at the development permit stage. But from what I'm seeing, there is 2 large rooms which could probably house somewhere between 20 to 30 bike stalls. The 60 stalls, which would be related to the residential units, are all contained in the underground parking. And what we would see is 6, it's called visitor stalls, located along 7th Streets. With regards to setbacks for this district, you can see up here on the screen, we have a comparison of what you could do with the R4 district, which is currently in place, and what we're trying to achieve with the direct control districts. With the R4 district, you're fairly limited into the amount of sites you can actually build out. The setbacks, as you can see here on the rear lane, show 7.5 meters, whereas proposed in the direct control we see 2.5 meters. The reason for that is that right adjacent to this lane, we have the building interface of the Canada Post. It's the side of the Canada Post, and further along you have the back of the Rustic Canada, the back of the Unlimited Board Shop, and then Subway. So the impacts to moving the building further towards the lane is relatively low to non-existent. And then what that also allows us to do is take the landscape space, which would be that additional 5 meters, and pull it internal onto the sites to create like a nicer open space and some amenities for the residents, which I'll show you in a slide coming up here shortly.
Can I just interrupt with a question? So the build-to line on 7th Avenue then, and the proposed district, would that more or less line up with the facade of the Canada Post building?
Yes, that's the exact intent behind that. So what we're trying to achieve along like 7th Ave on 7th Ave is this pedestrian corridor, which has a very strong pedestrian scale to it, and it maintains that, I think it's 3 meters of sidewalk in front of the Canada Post. And what we'd like to see with that is that it just carries down all the way onto 7th Street. So that's why we have the 1 meter setback and not like a 0 meter setback, so that we can maintain the sidewalk depth all the way down.
Thank you.
Looking at the setback along 7th Street, we've got a 3 meter setback, which is consistent with the R4 district and would allow for the buildings to essentially be set back contextually with the rest of the development along 7th. With regards to the side yard setback adjacent to the existing R4 fourplex, they're actually proposing a 3 meter setback. Reason being is that they want to create an additional buffer between this building and the adjacent, and because we do have a height of 14.5 meters, roughly located here in the back corner, it just allows for for a little bit more space to create some privacy and to address that issue. Here's a landscape concept. So when I was speaking to that 2.5 meter rear yard setback, the intent with that is to actually take that space which would either be the 7.5 meter setback and flip that internally, so we can actually get some usable space out of it. Otherwise, we just have a space in the back of a lane. It's likely not to get used. So by pushing the building back, it opens up, some more internal space within this area here. On the direct control, it's called district, we would see a requirement for 30%, it's called landscaping. Within that, though, there is some flexibility for some innovation. So 40% of the total landscaping requirement could actually be provided as a green roof if it's proposed as an intensive or extensive green roof. So it just provides some options, like if they are short on some landscaping requirements, they can get a little bit innovative with design of the building itself.
So one other question. This is just land use, but in the proposed development there, it's all underground parkade. So where would you expect to see the entrance for
access?
the parkade?
We'll get to that in a minute.
Okay.
Good? Yeah. But short answer is right here. I'll show you the parkade plan after I get through everything.
Sure.
So that's landscaping. So what could the design actually look like? Here's a conceptual, I'm a SketchUp model. It's, like nothing detailed with the architecture style or anything to that extent, but it just provides some building massing to kind of understand the scale of this development and what it could potentially look like if they were to go with a 40-unit build out. So what you're seeing along 7th Avenue and 7th Street here is we have like a 2.5-story building, which is fairly consistent with the rest of the streetscape along those avenues and streets. It allows for a pedestrian-scaled environment, and as you can see here, as the building increases in height, we do see a tiered like roof line going. The intent behind that is to reduce the massing of the building, but then also to try and maintain some of those mountain views that we love here so much in Canmore. So what do those view sheds actually look like? As like part of the application, we've worked with the developer to provide some analysis on that. So we have some renderings from like key intersections and view sheds from off of 7th Street, 7th Ave, and off of Main Street. So here's the existing view if you're looking towards the fourplex here on 7th Ave, it's called north towards the church. That's what it looks like now. What we could potentially see is something like this. So as you can see, so the building is pulled up in line towards the street. You're getting a pedestrian environment and an enhanced streetscape from what's currently there. Flipping to the next view, 7th and 7th, located on the southeast corner, just across from Miners Hall. That's currently what you're seeing now. What it could look like is something like this. So again, it's addressing the street corner, providing an active edge. This view is not from a key intersection, but it's from a valuable viewpoint within town with relation to the mountains in the back. You have Holling and Miners Peak and Rundle. So this view is actually taken from the edge of the lane in between the Miners Hall and Beamer's Coffee. So if you're looking there, this is what that could look like. As you can see here along 7th Avenue, we have that 2.5-story build. Then along the rear lane is where we're seeing a little bit of like the larger mass coming in, which would then go up to 14.5 meters up here in the back point.
So would we actually expect to see the 30-foot trees there when the
That's just a visual, conceptual thing.
Yeah.
What's actually proposed there is actually going to be residential access, and there will be some unit entrances off of this. So it just, again, it's a massing model, nothing in detail. We'll get to those details at the development permit stage. And then one final view, one of the key main intersections downtown. This is just taken right in front of the Canmore Hotel looking south. One of the best views in town, probably from downtown. So what you're seeing here is the impact of that development tucked away in behind the Rusticana and along 7th Ave there. So not so much of an impact there when you're looking to the south. How does this all play into the municipal development plan itself? Do you have a question?
Councillor Russell, you have a question?
Thank you, Mr. Ferry. Under the R4 district, what's the maximum height that's allowed?
Maximum height's 11.
11, thank
11
you.
meters. Yeah. So flip back here. So how does this all look into the municipal development plan? It's a little bit further detailed in the staff report, which I'm hopefully sure you've all read. But in general, it aligns with the growth management policies, the affordable housing goals, and the neighborhood residential goals. When looking at the SSR, administration has looked it over in its entirety, and it seems to be completed correctly. The score weighting from the applicant on the points within the offset, it's called matrix spreadsheet, seems to be accurate and appropriate. And the ultimate score from the offset, it's called matrix, is 22.61, so it's scoring a positive score. How you guys will interpret that in the grand scheme of things, I'll leave to you, but it's showing it a positive score at the moment. Strategic alignment, we're looking at, this aligns with one of the main priorities in town here, which is to provide affordable housing like stock in town. So, as I've previously mentioned, there will be a 10% requirement of the overall development to be provided as perpetual affordable housing. So what have we looked at in terms of alternative solutions? As you would have seen in the staff report there, in 2015, there was a commercial needs study that was undertaken for the town. Within the study, it actually identified some commercial infill opportunities within the town center and adjacent to. The parking lot for the church was actually highlighted as one of those potential infill sites. It's approximately 620 square meters, so there is some opportunity there. We have explored the opportunity, with the applicant to kind of encourage them to do some commercial in there, because it is so, like close to the town center. It would finish off this last block of commercial in there, but unfortunately, we don't have any requirements to do so, and the applicant has indicated that just based on the amenities that are within like the town center and within close proximity, that they're not feeling the need to do that, which is perfectly fine. And then also with commercial space as well, there could be like an increase in height because of the commercial space requirements internally, so the building could also get slightly higher. And then the final reason was that the residential unit count would also be decreased as well. So for those reasons, they've opted out to not include commercial into this project. So based on everything you've heard here today, administration is recommending that council give first reading to Bylaw 2016-28, and that we schedule a public hearing for Tuesday, April 25th, 2017 at 6 p.m. And open the floor to any questions you might have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Henry. It is a little blurred in thinking about the presentation and all in the discussion, because this is land use we're actually deciding or talking about, not development. But because we know there's a proposed development, it's hard to kind of cut off the questions at land use and not stray into development-related questions, but we'll try. So the first question I have, just for further better understanding, is the direction to make this a DC district. While I appreciate that in the bylaw itself, the Planning Commission would be the approving authority, not council. And I also appreciate the rationale you have in your report for suggesting that. But I know that there are, throughout the community, some examples of specialized districts, I guess, where the town has taken essentially an R3 district and made it an R3 hyphen something else. Stewart Creek is a good example. So it allows for an R3 type district, but with some specific variables for that area. And I'm just wonder if you could talk a little bit more about why we aren't considering an R4 hyphen downtown or some sort of a specialized R4 district.
You bet. So, as you would have seen in the report there, we've drafted up this district specific to this site and the amount of land that's available. So if you flip back, I'll flip back to this screen here. If you look at, the available, commercial infill sites, or even, like redevelopable land within the town center, we've tailored, the front yard setbacks, rear yard setbacks, side yard setbacks, specifically, to this site. We've also tailored it, the density specific to the amount of land that's available. So seeing this district again, somewhere within the town center, I would say is rather unlikely. So for that reason in particular, that's, why I'm not proposing this to be a general district, just because I don't see this, being used again. Second to that, we have the perpetual affordable housing requirement in there. Through a, like a standard district, we wouldn't, be able to specify, those kind of requirements. So looking at those reasons there, that's why we're not proposing this as like a regular district within the land use bylaw.
Okay, thanks for that answer. And of course, with the Planning Commission as the approving authority, the decision from the CPC would be something that could be appealed afterwards, right?
That's correct.
I have other questions, but Councillor Krausert, you have a question?
Your Worship, thank you, Mr. Henry, for your presentation. I have a few different questions, but I'll start with where the mayor left off. I was just looking back as to where does it say in the report why it's the Planning Commission that is the development authority as opposed to council? I was just wondering, because normally we're presented with council as the development authority, so I was just wondering what the thinking was and what the benefits of having the Planning Commission were.
So the benefits really are, well, it's sort of a two-edged sword. It's, we could bring it here and, I know like your agendas get fairly busy, so it's something that, like we've considered. The planning authority is a development authority, which is capable of making decisions on, development applications. At the same time, if you feel, that it's, like in a council's best interest, to have this back at the development permit stage, we are not in any way, shape opposed to that. So, if that answers your question, then
yeah, what I would appreciate is if it comes back for second reading and we proceed that far, that we actually have some that's spoken to in the report, because it would be helpful to sort of know the benefit of having one or the other.
Yeah.
With regards to the SSR,
yes,
you mentioned that it would be up to us to interpret that what that score is, and it's a very good score.
Yeah.
We didn't get a copy of the SSR, and so I'm hoping that can be provided as part of the website package well in advance of the public hearing, so that council and the public could see that.
That I will for
Great.
Sure make its way into the package for you.
Great,
Sorry
thanks.
about that.
And I just had one small other question. I just didn't understand one thing here. It was just right in the bylaw itself. It's where it mentions that parking stalls for such dwelling units may be tandem.
Yes.
And I was just wondering what that meant.
Right, so I've got a backup slide here. There you go. So when you're looking at the parkade space here, so what we're seeing are tandem stalls.
Okay.
So these stalls would essentially be like you'd pull one in, or like you pull a car into it, and another car would just follow right in behind it. Those stalls would be specifically assigned to a 3 or 4 bedroom unit.
Right.
Just based on the parking requirements, but it's not something that's uncommon. It's just a way to maximize, like the parking space within the parkade itself.
So for the tandem stalls, they would apply to the same unit, so that the occupants of that unit would work out amongst themselves,
Right.
getting the vehicles out. Okay.
Yeah. What we wouldn't want to see is like one of these tandem units go to, say, like I'm like a 1 bedroom and a 2 bedroom unit, because then you're, like trying to coordinate, the vehicles coming in and out. So they would specifically need to be assigned to a 3 or 4 bedroom unit.
Great. Thank you very much. Appreciate that answer.
Councillor Sanford?
Thank you, Worship. Thank you for your presentation. I was asking a question, and maybe this slide will answer it, but Where is it proposed on this site that there would be garbage and recycling facilities?
Yes, so that's something that we would ultimately hash out at the development permit stage, but the discussions were had, and they would be off of the lane, so they would likely be tucked into the building itself. The details of that, we would have to sort out at the development permit stage, but, and those discussions are already in
Yeah,
the works.
so that's what I was suggesting, it gets a little blurred, because location of garbage and whatnot isn't part of land use, it's just, that would be the next stage.
Yeah.
Although it is confusing, because
Yeah,
we're
well,
looking at a,
It's mentioned in here, so.
yeah,
Right.
I just also wanted to ask, under 3.37.3, discretionary uses, it shows that parking areas and structures are a discretionary use. And it seems to be an integral part of this project to have the parking underground.
Sorry, it was section 3.
3.37.3, the permitted uses versus the discretionary uses.
Correct. So what we're trying to accommodate here is the timing of development. Because we have the church on site and we have it's called the existing parking structure, the timing between, like if this does go to a third reading and it does get approved, the timing of the development likely will not be right away, so there will be non-conforming use if we don't have those in place, so we're just accommodating that. And as you can see there too, we also have the use for the church, the cultural establishment, which would be for a church, so that's why you're seeing those uses there right now.
Okay, but that parking structure is necessary, right?
Yes.
It's a necessary part of this project.
It would
Yeah.
have to be a part of the project,
Okay.
otherwise the parking would just not
Okay,
work.
well, that's why I was just wondering why it was discretionary.
Right.
And there was one more thing you mentioned about the visitor parking on the street,
Yes.
and you said that there would be stalls, but is that just public parking in general?
Currently, the way it stands right now is you have the access right here to the church parking, and then you have a loading area right in front of the church. So this site is, or like this street frontage here actually isn't even, being used as public parking at the moment, because there is the access interrupting, potential parking opportunities. So with the redevelopment of this site, it would actually open up, some like parking stalls on street, which I would hope, would be signed as visitor stalls.
So not necessarily public parking for the street front,
Right.
but it would be attributed to that building.
Yes.
Thank you.
in the proposed bylaw, it talks about the perpetually affordable housing requirement, 3.37.6. And the bylaw would have it that the developer shall make available a minimum of 10% of the residential units. And while this isn't really a land use part of the discussion, do you know if there's an understanding or CCHC's involvement? I assume you didn't mention that you'd talked to CCHC about this proposed land use, or?
Yeah, they've been involved right from the start.
Yeah, I'm curious how a developer on this parcel would handle that requirement, whether a developer would be expected to actually promote and sell the 4 PH units, or a future developer on this land, would they look to CCHC to promote and develop? Do you know if that question's been discussed?
That has not been discussed to date. What I would envision that, is that these units go over to, like CCHC after they've been built, and it would be CCHC to kind of promote them and have them within their inventory. But if there's another solution that you would like to see, again, we're totally open at this point because it is only conceptual.
Great. Thank you. Are there other questions from members of council? I don't see any other questions, so thanks for your presentation. I will be then moving that council give first reading to bylaw 2016-28 and schedule a public hearing for April the 25th, 2017 at 6 p.m. And I don't think I need an amendment for this, but just an editorial note, there's a typo in the bylaw under 3.37.8.1. So the motion is to give first reading and schedule the public hearing. Speaking to that motion, Councillor Krausert.
I was just going to be since you mentioned that one typo in the bylaw cover itself under section 2.1, redesignate is misspelled there. But I will be supporting this motion. I think it's an interesting design, and I'm very interested to see what the community has to say about it at the public hearing. I think that there's some good innovation there, and want to know what, especially the neighbors and downtown, what their thoughts are. So I definitely will support this motion.
I'm happy to support the motion. I think the envisioned land use district will encourage the sort of housing solutions in the downtown core that we've been looking for. And I'm particularly happy to see the inclusion of obligation within the land use to provide some PAH, because we've always talked about not having PAH or affordable housing only in one part of town, but mixed or scattered around town, and within the downtown core is an ideal location for the affordable housing units. So I'll be happy to support first reading of this bylaw. Councillor Russell.
Thank you, Your Worship. To speed along the process, I'm happy enough to see this go to first reading. I have to express a bit of concern. It seems like, we only passed our land use bylaw a couple of years ago, and everything we get coming up is direct control, direct control, direct control. I'll wait to hear from the public, but it causes me some concern that we've got a land use bylaw and no one seems interested in following it. So like I say, I'll support this to first reading and wait to hear some more public opinion on it.
Just to that point, it's an addition or an amendment to the land use bylaw. I don't understand how you are characterizing that nobody's supporting the land use bylaw. We're amending the land use bylaw, or proposing to, which is normal part of planning business.
Okay, well, I'll answer that one. What's the next amendment? What's the next change? We just keep pushing, we're pushing the limits in my mind. And as we continue to do this, where does it stop? If we start to fill in, you saw the viewscape presented, the view from the corner at Beamer's. We've wiped out that valley. What's next? Again, I'm willing to see this go ahead, but I'm not comfortable.
If I could just jump in on that.
No, actually, you can't.
Okay.
Sorry. This is council debate at this point, so thanks for your presentation. But Councillor McCallum.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'll be happy to support this to first reading. As we've just passed in our MDP, we've been looking for innovation from the development community, and this is definitely an example of it, and I'll be interested to see what the public has to say. I am appreciative of the units of perpetually affordable housing, and as we know, density provides affordability, so this is a key. Thank you.
Nobody else speaking to the motion then? I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. Thank you, Mr. Henry.
Great, thanks.
Moving on to item F2, the Animal Control Bylaw Amendment 2017-19, Animal Control Fee Schedule. Mr. Orr.
Good afternoon, Mayor Borman and members of council. I'm here to present Bylaw 2017-19, which is an amendment to the fee schedule of the current Animal Control Bylaw 10-2011. As you may recall, at the Committee of the Whole in February of this year, Community Social Development Manager Lisa Brown presented to you the Affordability Services Program. This program is intended to lessen the burden of financial services for those under a certain income threshold. This amendment will assist the program by doing just that, by waiving the one-year dog license fee for those who are eligible for the affordability program. Administration is supportive as it contributes to Canmore being an affordable community. We believe it could result in more dogs being licensed, and the financial implications are very minimal to the town. So administration's recommendation is that council give first, second, and third reading, and I am more than happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much. I guess my first question is, what about cats?
I knew you were going to say that.
It's like,
That's a very good question. I did do a little research. As it currently stands, there's a one-time $25 fee for cat licensing compared to a $55 a year license fee for dogs, which can be much more cost prohibitive. And as it stands, we only have 6 cats registered in the community.
shocking.
Not mine.
And the most recent one was 2006, so we didn't think it was of a very urgent nature.
Gee, that must have been mine
So
then.
that could have been a Circle of Life cat by now.
Okay, well, that answered my next question. How many cat licenses have we? Thank you. Are there any serious questions? Councillor Seeley?
Thank you, Mr. Orr. When you look at the affordability clause, what about nuisance dogs, vicious dogs? Those wouldn't qualify, right?
They would not.
Okay, so it's just the 1-year term that we're looking at. All right,
Correct.
thank you.
Councillor Russell?
Thank you. Mr. Orr, I get the point in this. However, if you're given I fully support the affordability program. However, if you can't afford to pay for your dog license, how are you feeding your dog? I mean, I just look at this and it causes me some angst. You say there's a very few numbers, but if we start to get a bunch of people, if we start to get a whole bunch of uptake on this that qualify for that, if it's a financial burden to cover the cost of a license, which $55 is as per the schedule, I wonder if we're not potentially creating an unintended consequence of a whole lot of dogs that may or may not be affordable by their owners to actually own the dog. I mean, pet ownership is a privilege, not a right.
I would agree with that. I did take that into consideration. However, I do know that there are some people who may have animals that may fall under certain circumstances where it becomes difficult. And I'm sympathetic to those who definitely feel that those animals are part of their family. And if they come upon circumstances where they might now qualify for the affordability program, this is intended to assist them in not seeing that financial burden. I try not to get too involved with people's decisions when I'm writing these, and just try to, I guess, look at how it would benefit the community and not how it would maybe influence others' decisions to obtain animals in that regard. So.
Thank you.
I just might weigh in on that, Councillor, because I'm told that pets add to the quality of life for many people, and I think that's what this is really about, is improving the opportunity for everybody in the town to enjoy a certain quality of life.
Can I comment to that?
Sure.
Fair enough. No problem with improving quality of life, but how many people what did you, I believe I heard you say earlier that you expected a small uptake to this?
Yes. As of March 21st, there were 63 people who had applied for the affordability program. Now that's 63 families. A family applies as one. So if every single one of these families had a dog, the result would be approximately $3,500 of a loss in our budget, as opposed to a $60,000 income we take on dog licenses every year. I did the math. Given how many dog licenses we have registered in town compared to the population, it's approximately 8% of the population, which would leave 5 licenses if these people who are eligible for this program were consistent with that number, which would be about $255.
So it's negligible. I guess I just, no, that's all right. I won't dig.
Councillor McCallum?
Thank you, Your Worship. Can you remind me, Mr. Orr, and thank you for your presentation. Can you remind me, Mr. Orr, are service dogs required to be licensed?
They're not.
They're not. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Comfort?
Yeah, could you tell me what the benefit is to the town of knowing that certain dogs are licensed, or that all dogs are licensed, of having that knowledge?
Well, one of the major benefits is that when people's dogs are at large or go missing, that if we come across them or members of the public come across them, they can actually run that information online or turn them into us, and we can have that dog returned to the owner very easily. With that, we do have a free ride home program for dogs that are licensed, so at every once a year you get a kind of a free ride home if your dog runs off. The other really important aspect is if we have dog attacks, they're much more trackable so that we can deal with those people appropriately. And I apologize, Councillor McCallum, I answered your question incorrectly. They are required to license, however, they are free of charge.
Oh, excellent, thank you.
What was that last comment? They are what?
Service dogs are free of charge.
Okay.
They are required to be licensed.
Right, got it.
I have another question, or part of it. So, and dogs, when they come to be, get their license, or their owners do, the dogs are required to be inoculated for rabies and something else, is that right? Or spayed?
Correct.
To be spayed?
Yeah, it's inoculated, and it's, here, I'm just trying to find it. Yeah, immunization from rabies and distemper.
And do you know if there's any consideration at the vets for people that, to Councillor Ross's inquiry about expenses of dog ownership, is there any, do the vets offer any kind of program to people who qualify for the affordability program?
I am not aware if the vets are offering anything to my understanding, most of the services in the affordability program are town services. I can only really speak to our part of it. I'm not familiar with all aspects of the affordability program.
Okay, thanks.
Councillor Krausert. Councillor Sanford.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Mr. Orr, for your presentation. I see that there's a 1-year renewable dog license. This is being extended to the 1-year dog license, correct?
Correct.
Is there a maximum number of dogs that you can license under this in the
There is
affordable?
not at this time, no.
So what is the maximum household number of dogs in Canmore?
27.
There's no maximum number that you can have in a household at this point in time?
There is not.
Okay, so this will cover every dog in the household on a 1-year basis if they qualify?
Correct.
Okay.
Councillor McCallum, did you have something else?
I was going to ask a question, but I realized it was better asked to somebody from FCSS, so.
Okay. Seeing no further questions, then at this time, thanks very much for your report. And I will move the council give first reading to bylaw 2017-19. Discussion on the motion. Seeing Councillor Krausert.
Your Worship, I'll definitely support this motion. I really appreciate the efforts that are being made in looking at all of the various services that we offer and seeing how we can make our town more affordable. I was looking at the 2016 Alberta spatial price study, I think it's called, in which the Alberta Finance puts out a study looking at the cost of living right across the province. And Canmore has the dubious distinction of being the most expensive place to live in the province. And that means that people that otherwise in other places would not have affordability issues are in fact struggling here. And so if you start to add up these benefits from a variety of places, if you qualify for that income, it all makes an impact. And $55 a year, I mean, that helps to offset the more expensive groceries. you know, $55 a year could mean the difference between your child's being in a summer program or not. You know, those sorts of things. And so I really appreciate this. This is something that we can do for those who qualify, and it helps support a socioeconomic diversity within our town that is absolutely essential to maintaining our community.
Councillor Russell.
Thank you, Worship. You know what, it supports the affordability program. I don't think with all respect to Councillor Krausert, I don't think $55 is saving the world. But I get concerned with if you're, you know, we cut this off, we've got a limit on this program. The dog owner that sits out there, they can't, you know, we can't afford the license, we don't think we can afford a dog license, but we've already got the pets. To me, it speaks the wrong way about the whole affordability thing. If you're, you know, part of that affordability program suggests financial counseling and encouraging people to manage. I just, you know, this seems to me to be a Band-Aid. I'm going to support it, but I don't know that it accomplishes much.
So you're speaking in support of the bylaw? Or? Thank you. Councillor Krausert.
I just had to respond. Those who are qualifying for the affordability program are not necessarily managing their money poorly. And to suggest that they maybe need to have some money counseling, I mean, we're talking about dignity and reasonable standard of living. We're not talking about people that are doing things wrong. They're simply trying to live their lives. And if this, I didn't say it was going to change the world, but it certainly adds to affordability when combined with other things for those who can afford it. And we have to move away, especially at this table, but throughout our community, thinking that people who are struggling financially is because that they are doing something wrong. The fact is we live in a very expensive place.
Councillor McCallum.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'd be happy to support this addition to the affordability program. I'd like to actually point out that the affordability program is not just a program of the town of Canmore. It's a collective of nonprofits that have come together to partner with the town of Canmore to provide these services. But I think that we need to remember, in addition to what Councillor Krausert said, is that we are looking at people who are on AISH. We're looking at seniors on fixed incomes. And to say that those people are not deserving of some companionship at some point is folly. So I would be pleased to support this.
Councillor Russell, did you have something to add?
I did, Your Worship. My reference to, I apologize, Councillor Krausert, if you're offended by my reference to financial counseling. My reference to financial counseling is drawn from the text of the program. I was not casting any judgment.
Okay, with that, I think I'll call the question on first reading of the bylaw. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. I'll move the council give second reading to bylaw 2017-19. Discussion on the motion. Seeing none, call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. Seek leave from council go to third reading of the bylaw 2017-19. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. And I'll move the council give third reading to bylaw 2017-19. Speaking to the motion, seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. Moving on then to item F3, bylaw 2017-20, which is the amendment to traffic and road use 2014-06 bylaw. Mr. Asarte and Mr. Orr, or is it just Mr. Asarte? It's a tag team.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. 2 weeks ago, we were here to present proposed changes to the road use bylaw. Those changes would continue to promote safe and efficient use of the roads and to encourage people of all ages and abilities to make a greater number of trips by foot, bicycle, and transit. Through this approach, we'll build capacity in the roads for people to drive, for us to drive those times we need it and choose to drive. Specifically, the changes proposed are to include pedal electric bicycles in the definition of bicycle, which will allow them to be used not only on the roads, but on our pathway network. Changes to explicitly permit a person to cycle through a crossing. Those cycling through crossings are reminded that they must yield right of way to vehicular traffic. And in crossings, vehicular traffic, of course, yields right of way to pedestrians. And bylaws to regulate the use of bicycle lanes. The proposed amendments restrict the way that bicycle lanes are used to people who are cycling or using mobility aids, except in specific circumstances, and establish requirements for people using cycle lanes, such as the need to yield when you're exiting from a bicycle lane, either onto a sidewalk or into the roadway. There are also proposed amendments related to bylaw. I'll turn it over to Mr. Orr, who will outline those changes.
Thank you, Mr. Sarte. So our two changes that we're proposing are to move provincial parking statutes from the Traffic Safety Act rules and the road regulation into the road use bylaw to expedite our newer officers and seasonal officers to be able to enforce those. And lastly, we had some changes with trailers to allow non-recreational trailers to park in town, which would be more consistent with other municipalities in the province. I know there were some questions in regards to this at the Committee of the Whole. I've done some research in regards to minimum recreational vehicle sizes in other municipalities. And in Calgary, Edmonton, and in other numerous comparable municipalities, I could not find anything whatsoever speaking to this. So our recommendation moving forward is to go with these changes. Lastly, there was some minor changes in the fee schedule we needed to make. There was just a couple of fine amounts that were slightly off. As you can see, the general parking 9.2 from the rules of the road reg needed to be moved down to 78 to be consistent with provincial legislation, as well as 9.11. So to that, we are recommending that Council give first, second, and third reading to this bylaw with the following amendments made into Schedule A, and we've taken the liberty of writing some motions there if they suit you. And as always, we're happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Councillor Krausert.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Mr. Orr, for your presentation. I don't have a question, but you did reference at the Committee of the Whole, and I just wanted to thank you for reaching out to me following that meeting and to listen to my concerns, and I could find out more as you've described, and I found that very helpful, and I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Russell.
Thank you, Worship. This is probably better for Mr. Sarte, Mr. Orr. Mr. Sarte, with this amendment to add the e-bikes into the definition of vehicle, that takes us out of consistency with the Traffic Safety Act. Did we consult anybody in legal to decide where we stand by us contradicting the provincial statute?
In terms of use of electric bicycles?
In terms of our incorporating electric bicycles into the definition of vehicle for our bylaw?
I don't believe that the Traffic Safety Act regulates the use of pathways. They regulate the use of roads. On roads, they do permit the use of electric bicycles. And the change that we're proposing would not change any of the rules of the road in any way. What it does specifically is just expand the definition of bicycle for the purposes of regulating the use of pathways within our municipality to include the definition of pedal electric bicycles. So now they would be permitted on paths.
Have we verified that with anybody at the provincial or a legal opinion to decide if we can do that or not? I'm seeing that as potentially we're contradicting the provincial statute, which we're not supposed to do municipally.
I don't believe that there are provincial statutes that govern the use of our pathway network. I think that is left to municipalities to govern, and municipalities like the City of Calgary have also made this exact change in the way that we're making it to expand their definition of bicycle to include pedal electric bicycles specifically. not the full range of electric bicycles that are permitted on the roads, but only very specifically those that must be pedaled in order for the motor to engage. And so with this, we're bringing ourselves in line with the City of Calgary and others who have allowed for, on their municipal pathways, not on the roadways themselves, but municipal pathways, have allowed for that use.
Thank you. I have one question. With regard to the bicycles crossing, you presented, I believe, at the Committee of the Whole that this is, you're following an interpretation by a couple of RCMP detachments. Have we consulted anybody on this decision? Anybody, no legal opinion on this one?
No, no legal opinion.
Any risk assessment on this one?
Again, what we're doing is clarifying the interpretation that our local RCMP are making in terms of the Traffic Safety Act and other RCMP detachments. This, I think, is pretty widely and consistently the interpretation of the Traffic Safety Act, which is to say that as a cyclist on a pathway, when you enter into the roadway, you're entering into the roadway off of a pathway. You are required to yield to the traffic on that road. But there is no requirement for you to dismount from your bicycle. What dismounting from your bicycle does is puts you into the definition of pedestrian in terms of the Traffic Safety Act, at which point the vehicular traffic must yield to you. And so the bylaw that we're entering clarifies that, because I don't think it's clear for everybody how the TSA is typically interpreted.
Mr. Fark, Mr. Fark had a point to make on that.
Sorry, he made the same point. It's just to clarify that we are following the lead of other municipalities, that this is not the type of bylaw amendment that would require a risk assessment or legal opinion, as it is a clarification of what is clearly understood and in statute. So yes, he has already made that point.
Thank you. Councillor Russell, did you have another question? Councillor Seeley.
Thank you, Your Worship. Mr. Asarte, when it comes to yielding the right-of-way and dismounting, I guess I have some safety concerns about that when it comes to children. Adults might understand that, children may not. And I would prefer to see a dismount, maybe just go over the rationale and how that might, and what I'm specifically thinking about is children riding to school. Their head isn't necessarily, it should be, in paying attention to all the traffic rules and everything else. Their mind might be somewhere else. And if it was to dismount, it would be safer for them.
Roads are places with big, large moving vehicles, and I think it's incumbent on parents, and I think there's also a role for the schools and RCMP, which they play through the bicycle rodeo and through the workshops that they do through the schools to teach children how to use roads safely. And very common what we're seeing is that the school and parents are recommending or requiring their kids to dismount at crossings. That is good safe practice. It does cause or force the yielding of vehicular traffic, and it also slows down the speed of the children using the crossing. Now, at some point, a child quite certainly can, at a certain age or a certain ability, quite certainly can safely use a crossing and appropriately yield in that crossing. And I don't think it's up to us to necessarily regulate each activity. We want to create conditions for people to just generally use the roads safely, teach their children, get them to a point where they're comfortable. They use the roads differently at that point. That I think is a little bit beyond regulation and more into parents being involved in how their kids use the roads.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Comfort.
Yes, I had a question about the definition of electric bicycle, which was further enhanced for me as I approached council this evening. a bicycle with a young man, probably 10 years old or so, which was electric in nature. I wasn't clear if it was pedal assist, the pedal assist one. It was tricked out to resemble a motocross motorcycle. And he came down the steps towards me, like on it, mounted on it, and around the corner to follow his dad up the laneway. So my question is, what is the, I guess, regulation? How does it affect that, kids on bikes?
Was it Jacob? I can talk to him.
I could identify. No, he's not a child. It depends. So I just wanted a clarification. So pedal assist means that so the trikes, the Cycling for Life program, what are those classified as?
Those are pedal electric as well. And so they have sensors around the pedal sprocket that sense the cadence of a person cycling. As soon as you stop pedaling, the motor disengages. And so it requires constant pedaling. And it's, the intent is that it's not like a motorbike where you turn a throttle and you have more or less, you can just add batteries and get more power. This is intended to be a purpose-built bicycle that is intended to assist with pedaling to help with hills or larger loads, or if you don't have the strength to pedal at the same rate, it can assist you with that. And they tend to be a safer bicycle because they don't require you to activate a throttle and disengage a throttle. It just requires you to use the bicycle as you've learned how to use it. Pedal when you want to go, stop pedaling when you want to stop.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Russell?
Thank you. Actually, I guess this may go to both of you. What's our education plan at this point? Because we are making some phenomenal changes to what's historically been considered practice. And the follow-up to that is, what's our enforcement plan when we don't get compliance or if we don't, the education fails?
I'll speak to the first part around education. Each year we're trying to do more in terms of messaging around courtesy and looking out for one another. And so you'll see some advertisements in the Outlook to that effect and information going out on the website. We're working more now with the schools on school travel planning. Lawrence Grassi this year, both in terms of infrastructure improvements, but also the work that they're doing inside the school to educate and encourage children. Elizabeth Rummel has indicated interest in the same program, so looking to get that started. I think it really starts with kids. That's the important area to target. I think it's worth noting that we have some of the most safe streets in all of Canada. We saw our CMP statistics that came out last week that indicate our roads are approximately 4 to 5 times safer than the national average. And I think in a large part that's a function of having a lot of people out using the streets in a lot of different ways, and there's a very high awareness. And so I don't think we have a big problem in terms of safety to solve. We want to move our injury rates down to 0. That's our goal. So we're not there yet, but we aren't addressing an acute safety problem here. What we're addressing is trying to continue to encourage people to use the infrastructure appropriately, whether it's bike lanes or crossings, to encourage people to look out for themselves and to look out for one another. And so putting more onus on people who are cycling to emphasizing with them to yield the right of way or with children to dismount. So I think that's the nature of the messaging. Look out for one another, continue to do what we're doing because it's working. We've got some of the highest children's cycle mode share in the country, something like 15 times the national average. We've got very safe streets, and so what we're doing is working. It's just about continuing to make that progress and doing what we can to work with the schools and educate through the channels that we typically use.
Thank you. And to Mr. Worthy, what's the enforcement plan? Because I appreciate the children aspect being portrayed that we're working. We've got a lot of fly through the intersection activity.
Well, at this point, we've come up with no specific targeted enforcement plan. This is a change that will require awareness by our officers when they're out on patrol. The way I see it with the changes with the electric bikes and the intersections, we'll take the same approach we are now with the current rules. Is during patrols and while we're out there, we're going to be always keeping an eye out for these things. When we see offenses, we always take that education first approach, and if we're encountering a lot of it, we move on to enforcement. I can speak to the education a bit. I've been on the project with Canmore Community Cruisers. I believe it's called the School Travel Master Plan with Councillor Comfort. And typically what we do a lot of answering of questions and bringing information to that group, and they're passing it back on to the school children. And as Mr. Sarte says, they're hoping to expand on that. We hope to be a part of that as well. There are ideas for education coming up the new school year next year with us being out with the RCMP and doing what we call bike-abouts or walkabouts, and stopping children, doing positive ticketing, doing reinforcement and stuff like that, and providing information, and I guess you could call them prizes for following the rules properly. So that's what we've really thought of doing so far.
Thank you.
Just picking up on that point of Councillor Russell's, I think we've probably all been shocked at one point or another by having a cyclist going through a four-way intersection when we weren't expecting them to. In fact, when we were expecting them to stop like they're supposed to. And I appreciate that it really is a very small percentage of cyclists. But on that specific issue, I'd ask a similar question before. And I thought my understanding was that only the RCMP can enforce the infraction of a cyclist going through a stop sign. Is that, can Bylaw do anything other than shake a finger?
That's correct. When it comes to our own bylaws, we can enforce them. Things like going through a stop sign or Traffic Safety Act offenses, and are considering moving offenses. So those would be left to the RCMP, as our Traffic Safety Act authorities are non-moving only. Right. So that is correct.
Yeah. So, and I also understand from the staff sergeant that they have, over the last year or more, upped to some extent their enforcement of that rule, that law, and from time to time have stationed RCMP at stop signs to talk to cyclists that are running the stop sign. In fact, I think a member of our staff, oh, that was Ms. DeSoto. Anyway, so that is RCMP work, and while we'd like to see more of it, perhaps, they are doing that work. Yes, that's all that you need to say.
Fair enough, yes.
Great, thank you. I have a few questions. You have
Just a quick one.
Councillor Comfort?
This is just to settle a dinner table argument. So, yeah, so if I'm stopped at the end of that trail and I get off my bike, then the traffic has to stop for me and allow me to cross because I'm now a pedestrian. Is that right?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, so can I then cycle across? Or do I have to walk my bike across?
You have to walk your bike across. As soon as you mount your bicycle, you are now considered a vehicle.
Okay, thanks.
Who won?
So I do have a couple of questions, a few questions maybe. So in 7.1 of the current bylaw, Bylaw 06/2014, it identifies that the rules for roller skating, inline skating, etc., for people over the age of 12 are not allowed on sidewalks. But currently, is it permissible to roller skate or inline skate or skateboard on any of our roadways? It's just the sidewalks that it's not permitted. Is that correct?
Yeah, those are permitted on the roads, but they're not permitted on the sidewalks. That'd be correct.
Great, thank you. And in section 18.1 of the existing bylaw, speaking about the clearing of sidewalks and the necessity for residents to have their walks shoveled after snowfall within 48 hours. Just remind me what the town of Canmore practice is for the sidewalks that we're responsible for? Ms. DeSoto?
Well, we aim to meet the bylaw requirements and clear the municipal sidewalks in the appropriate timeframe.
Yeah.
That is our objective, yes.
Yeah. And then do you have any idea how often we slip on that? I mean, I hear often, oh, the town never clears their sidewalks, or words to that effect. And I know that we do.
Mm-hmm.
I have no idea if we actually monitor that we've got all of our sidewalks cleared within 48 hours or not.
Well, it is something that we've discussed with council during budget requests in the past to support requests for additional equipment specifically to clean sidewalks, etc. So I can check with Public Works to see if they're monitoring their compliance, but I haven't seen any report to date.
Thank you. The other question I have is along the same lines of what you've been discussing already at length. So in the existing bylaw, 5.3, it's clear that a person riding a bicycle on a sidewalk or multi-use trail shall yield the right of way to pedestrians. And in the proposed additional or new clause, 5.4, it notes the person riding a bicycle through a multi-use or cycle crossing shall yield the right of way to vehicles. Is it necessary to add to 5.4 and pedestrians? I mean, I know that cyclists are meant to yield the right of way to pedestrians in places other than on the bicycle, that is within crosswalks. But it doesn't actually say that anywhere that I could see. And I guess I'm leading up to a possibility of just a small amendment to add and pedestrians in the proposed 5.4. But if it's addressed somewhere else in the bylaw, it doesn't matter.
I believe it is.
Pardon me?
6.4 addresses it when they're using an exclusive bike lane. Maybe that would be the place to make the change. 6.4, person using.
No, I think that actually accomplishes, that answers my question, 6.4.
Okay.
Great, thank you. Are there any other questions, Councillor Sanford?
Thank you, Worship. Thank you, Mr. Asarte and Mr. Orr. I had a question about section 9.1, the general parking restrictions.
This is in the existing bylaw, or?
These are the proposed amendments. So under M, there's a new M that says parking in excess of 72 consecutive hours. So we're adding a parking restriction as well?
That's a very good question. This law currently exists in the Traffic Safety Act. Any vehicle that is on a road more than 72 hours is considered to be abandoned under the Traffic Safety Act and comes with a fine of $310. This is an issue that is definitely prevalent in our community with people storing vehicles and leaving here and such. So what we've done is we've added this to our bylaw so we can have a much lower fine that isn't so punitive of $90.
Okay, so this is one of the ones you've migrated from the Traffic Safety Act so that our own bylaw officers can enforce it, is that correct?
It was twofold. It was so that our peace officers can enforce it right now. It was more so to lessen the fine because I fined $310 for such an offense to be quite punitive.
Okay, because there's often controversy in the community about people leaving their cars parked on the street for excessive amounts of time and not moving them. So this would be one way to address it after 72 hours.
That is
Is that
correct.
correct? Okay. That seems like a fairly major change, so it might be something that people will be paying attention to in the near future. So it's just the fee for that is now $90 as opposed to $310.
That's
Is that correct? Okay.
Councillor Seeley.
Mr. Orr, on page 3, I just need some clarification under H. Within 1.5 meters of access, so you can't stop or park a vehicle. 1.5 meters to a garage, private road, or driveway. The driveway part, I think, is a little sticky, isn't it? So does that mean that you can't park within 1.5 meters of a driveway?
Also currently enforced under the Traffic and Safety Act rules of the road regulation. So, and again, all we're doing is moving that into our bylaw to give the enforcement ability to our newer officers and seasonal folks.
And I guess my question would be how our community is built. There's very small sections that you can barely fit a vehicle in, and you certainly don't have 1.5 meters on either side. So
you can't park there.
So that would be enforced? That could be enforced? I don't think it has been enforced.
Generally with this one, what we do is we do complaint-based enforcement. We do know there are roads where it's quite narrow and all the neighbors have more or less a handshake agreement where they're both okay with it, and if they're both okay with it, we're okay with it. So we're not going to start seeking this out. But there are sightline issues that can come about from this if larger vans or trucks are parked within 1.5 meters of a driveway, and if someone has to pull out onto a busy street with that, it can create hazards.
Okay, thank you.
I think that's all of the questions then at this time. Thanks, both of you, for your presentations. Just on a process thing, so we're approving bylaw 2017-20. If anybody would like to see the main bylaw bylaw 06-2014 changed in some way other than what's in the proposed bylaw before us, it would have to be an amendment to bylaw 2017-20 to insert or amend bylaw 06-2014. But of course that won't happen. So with that, I will move the council give first reading to bylaw 2017-20, which is the bylaw to amend traffic and road use bylaw 2014-06. I see Councillor Russell wishing to speak to the motion.
I'm not going to support it, and I'd just like to clarify that I'm extremely comfortable and happy with the traffic sections. I think it's a very effective move on behalf of our municipal enforcement team. It makes everyone effective. It's just all around good. I am just so twisted with the bicycling stuff. I'm sorry, I can't even come up with an amendment I tried to cobble an amendment to propose that, so I will be voting against this motion based on the bicycling components of it.
Councillor Cresswell.
Your Worship, I'll definitely support this bylaw. I think this makes a lot of sense. This really I actually don't see a lot of change of law whatsoever here. We're talking about incorporating in our bylaw something that is already law provincially, but now we can enforce it locally. We're talking about it putting into our bylaw, Councillor Russell raised the bicycle, is already the interpretation of the Highway Traffic Act. So I just think that this brings clarity and reinforces what is in most cases already the law, and allows it to be enforced by our bylaw officers, which means greater compliance is possible through greater access to enforcement and education. So I think this was a good piece of work.
Councillor Comfort.
I also will be pleased to support the bylaw. I also want to commend you for your work. It's a ton of work that's been done on this, and the work that you're doing in the community with community cruisers, with Canadian Rockies, and in educating the kids and the parents. And was happy to participate in that myself and witness it at minus 35, go for a little walkabout, where Mr. Asarti was notably absent, just saying. But it was, the work is really, Mr. Orr was there. It's really good work, and it's really greatly appreciated by the community. So thank you very much for that, and I'm happy to support this.
Just before I go to another point of discussion, Councillor, the motion should have been added to from that which is in the report, which I went to. So the motion includes the two amendments that are shown on the overhead. So that's actually the full wording of the motion showing there. Councillor Seeley.
I'm happy to support the bylaw. I did have similar concerns about bicycle safety, but I do appreciate the answers, and that works for me. Parents have to teach their kids how to be safe, and until they get to a certain point where they are safe, dismounting makes sense. But knowing that that's a safe option, I'm good with that, and the rest of the bylaw looks good. Thanks for all your work.
Councillor Stanford.
Thank you, Worship. I too will support the bylaw. I think there's a lot of work that's been done in determining the movement of pedestrians and cyclists and vehicles in the community, and I think this bylaw really determines some good ways for those three different areas to interface. I know that we are going to dedicated bicycle lanes in some parts of the community, and I think it's good to know what the pedestrian activity in those bicycle lanes should be. Pedestrians have right-of-ways at crosswalks, and I also think it's really important that bikes stop where there's traffic on either side, but that the cyclist doesn't have to dismount. I mean, I think there's some good nuances in this bylaw to make everybody safer, and I know that there's been a lot of work to determine what those variables are, so I really appreciate it, and thank you. I'll support the bylaw.
Councillor Seeley, did you have another comment? I'll add my support to the bylaw. And I think a lot of the discussion that we've had around this bylaw points to the fact that there's, to some extent, and perhaps to a large extent, uncertainty around the rules of the road when it comes to cycling. We're doing a lot of work to encourage people to get out of their cars and to ride bikes, and particularly in the downtown core to relieve congestion. And this is, I think, a big part of the work that we had to do. It brings greater certainty in my mind to that question that Councillor Comfort asked. So who's right? Whether people take the time to reference our bylaws or not, we're, from a governance perspective, doing the proper thing and making it clear within our bylaws what the rules are. So I'm happy to support the bylaw and thank staff for the work they've done to put this together. With that then, and this is on the motion that we give first reading to bylaw 2017-20 with the following amendments made to Schedule A to amend the minimum specified penalties for sections 9.11 and 9.2 to of $78 and $40 if paid within 7 days, and amend the minimum specified penalties for section 10.1 and 9.1 to $90 and $45 if paid within 7 days. So on that motion, calling the question, those in favor, opposed, motion's carried with Councillor Russell in opposition. I'll move then that council gives second reading to the bylaw as amended. Discussion on the motion. Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor, opposed, motion's carried with Councillor Russell in opposition. And I'll seek leave from council to go to third reading of the bylaw 2017-20. Those in favor, opposed, motion's carried unanimously. And I'll move the council give third reading to bylaw 2017-20 as amended. Discussion on the motion. See none, call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried with Councillor Russell in opposition. So the next item on the agenda is the CCHC Construction Loan Guarantee Bylaw. I'm just wondering if we should, that'll be more than 10 minutes. Well, I guess we'll have to delay the usual mid-meeting break. So, item F4, CCHC Construction Loan Guarantee Bylaw 2017-23. Ms. Van Kaimpima. Thank you.
Good evening, Your Worship, members of council. I'm before you this evening for consideration of the Guaranteeing Bylaw 2017-23 first reading. So the recommendation is that council gives first reading to that particular bylaw. So a description of what this is all about. So it's for funding of an affordable housing project on the old Delegation lands. And as I don't need to remind you, affordable housing is your number one priority. Canmore Community Housing Corporation, CCHC, in conjunction using third-party funding up to $16.3 million, has been tasked with moving forward with this project. The land value that will be used by CCHC for equity requirement, they will use the land value for their equity requirement for the funding, and their minimum equity requirement is 20%. As part of the funding mechanisms from the third party, the town is required to guarantee a portion of the loan, and what we're looking at right now is that the town provide a 35% loan guarantee. So in this case, it would be to a maximum of $5.7 million. And that would be for a period of time from the earlier when the units are sold, but not later than June 30th of 2019. So that would be the period of time for the guarantee. So we have not chosen, or CCHC has not chosen the builder nor the lender yet. Therefore, the total construction budget has not been finalized, although bids have been received and reviewed. So the guarantee amount that we're bringing before you this evening is based on the preliminary amounts that we've received. We expect that before second reading is considered by council, that we will have the budget, the builder, and the lender all in place. So the financing process takes about 2.5 months from start to finish, as you can see by the schedule in the report before you. So giving first reading now will start that financing process, so it will be more likely that we will be able to have that complete when we're ready for construction to proceed. So what's the legislation that's applicable to the situation? So if we look at the Municipal Government Act, particularly in section 266, it requires that a municipality, if it's going to guarantee a loan for one of its controlled corporations, which CCHC is, council has to do that by bylaw. Also, the bylaw has to be advertised, and it has to include certain components to it, which you will see that the proposed bylaw does contain those components. The first one is the amount that you're borrowing, as well as the amount that we're looking to guarantee. And if you look at the 6th whereas, that's covered there. It also requires that the purpose for the borrowing be included, and the 2nd through the 5th whereas in the proposed bylaw covers that. The next item is the interest rate. So sections 3.4 and 3.6 cover that. The term, that's covered in 3.3. The terms of any repayment, you can find that in 3.5 and 4.1. And the source of funds for any repayment, and that can be located in 4.1. So as you can see, the bylaw does cover off the required components as per the MGA. So if we move on to other legislation that's applicable, there's also section 606, and that relates to what does it mean when it says that it has to be advertised. So what that means is it has to actually be published in it's a publication that has circulation throughout the affected community, and it has to be published for 2 consecutive weeks in that publication, and it must occur before second reading happens. Then there's another subsection, of course. There's always lots of legislation that applies to anything. So subsection 231 sub 3 talks about a petition. So it says that if a council passes a bylaw, a petition can be filed until 15 days after the last date of advertisement. So that also, all of that legislation feeds into that timeline that was provided. And just as an aside, the advertisements are planned to go into the April 13th and April 20th publications. Last but not least, Section 273 applies to the situation, and it says you only have a valid bylaw if 30 days have passed and there's been no application filed with the Court of Queen's Bench. So hence that last bit of the timeline that says you got to wait 30 days after third reading, which is how we pass our bylaws, before you actually have a valid guaranteeing bylaw and we can proceed. So that's the timeline I keep referring to, and that's in your report as well. So another section in your report talks about the financial impacts. So the guarantee does impact our town's debt limit and the percentage that we've used of it in particular. So currently our debt limit's approximately $68.3 million. We have $28.3 million of debt and debt commitments that we haven't necessarily drawn on, but we do have borrowing bylaws outstanding for. The loan guarantee would be for a maximum of $5.7 million or 11.5% of our debt limit. The percent of the debt limit used before this guarantee is 38.2%, and if you count this in, we'd be at 49.7%. I did receive an email asking for clarification or making a point from Councillor Krausert and questioning of some of the wording in the bylaw, in particular in sections 3.1 and 3.3 in the proposed bylaw. The concern was that the wording said in 3.1, council is hereby authorized to guarantee, and the concern was that can council as an individual guarantee something rather than in the capacity of the town. So council, when you do a bylaw, is the town. Further in 5.1, there is the clarification that this bylaw is actually authorizing the CAO to enter into that guaranteeing agreement. However, if council so chooses and would like to modify the wording so that it is more clear, my suggestion would be you might want to change in 3.1, change it to council hereby authorizes the guaranteeing of. And in 3.3, you could change it from council shall not guarantee to council shall not authorize the guarantee of. So slight change in the nuance. As well, in consultation with the municipal clerk, she had pointed out, so attachment number 2 provides council with the suggested or the draft advertisement that we're going into the publication. And in there it refers readers to go to the Canmore website and then under budget and financial information to take a look at the draft bylaw. However, the municipal clerk suggested a better place might be under the section bylaws pending approval. So the change in 3.2, not that it's part of the bylaw, so you wouldn't have to pass that, but I just wanted to let you know that that change would be made from what you've seen in your package. So back to the recommendation that council gives first reading to CCHC Construction Loan Guarantee Bylaw 2017-23. And at this point, I'd welcome any questions that you have.
Thank you very much. Just on that last point around the wording in the bylaw that Councillor Krausert had raised, I'm understanding that from a legal perspective, and I'm suppose from your perspective, or I guess that's what I'm asking, is it feels to me like it's either or, it doesn't really matter which way it reads.
That's correct. The original way is the way that other guaranteeing bylaws have been passed by council, and I'm confident that the wording would not get each of you individually as guaranteeing the bylaw, because in your capacity as council, you are the town. You are the only decision-making power.
I've always understood that, particularly in reference to something like the bylaw, when it's council referenced, particularly with capital C, it means the body,
correct,
the ruling body. Yeah.
But I don't think either way, I don't think we're
Sure.
incorrect.
I appreciate that. Are there any questions then at this time? Councillor Sanford?
Thank you, Your Worship. So under 3.3, it implies that the town will be repaid before June 30th, 2019, or beyond, sorry, when the funds are available to CCHC?
Yeah, so we just looking at some preliminary agreements with financing institutions. It appears that the agreement that would be entered into would require that the lending institution has first access to the sales proceeds from any units, and those funds would be used to pay back the principal of the loan. As in the interim, during construction, it's likely only interest-only payments would need to be made, and that would form part of the construction budget. So that's why in 3.3, they're going to get their money as they go, and every unit that's sold will bring down the principal. However, the bank, the lending institution, it looks like they would only allow construction loans for a period of about 2 years, and hence the June 30th stop dead date, regardless of units sold or not.
Okay. And then under 4.1, we have the options of what will occur.
Yeah, so that sort of leads into the guaranteeing component of it. So the bank basically doesn't want to be left not getting paid back.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's looking for the town to be able to cover that indebtedness should units not sell, CCHC. And the other thing to think about is even when June 30th comes, it's just that that's the end of this particular agreement. It doesn't mean that the bank wouldn't be amenable to signing a new agreement for a further period of time.
And by that time, they will have some capital, there would be something to secure it with the capital build of the building?
Yeah, so right now, like the equity component would be secured by the value of the land. And as you build units, the value of the land increases. So the bank, so the bank that we're looking at and the lending financial institutions would likely register something on the land to protect their investment. But their at-risk amount decreases as their sales because the sales proceeds go to them first. And then the town is just backing up. If CCHC can't make the required payments, then the town is providing a guarantee that we're the backstop.
Right, but the asset's increasing as it's being built.
Correct.
There's an asset that's being created on that land.
That's correct, yeah.
Okay, great, thank you.
Councillor Comfort.
Yes, thank you for your presentation, Ms. Van Kampima. I just wondered, you make reference to on the last deadline of June 15th, we have a valid bylaw if no application made to the Court of Queen's Bench. What would be a valid basis for filing such an application?
That the person who's filing the application doesn't agree with the bylaw, or, for example, so I'm not a lawyer, I haven't experienced this, so it would be conjecture on my part, but I would anticipate that someone would have had to sort of go through the already sort of complaint process, which would be the petition process. I imagine the courts would be looking for that. So a person may not be satisfied with the results of that petition, particularly if it wasn't successful. They may actually appeal the decisions that were made as part of that process and could file that with the Court of Queen's Bench as well. They don't actually even have to say that there was a problem with that process. They could also just say they don't agree. They think that the bylaw should either be amended or overturned.
Okay, thank you.
Just to that point, and I'm looking to Mr. Fark perhaps for an understanding of the process. If there were to be an application made to the Court of Queen's Bench, I understand that the Court of Queen's Bench or any other court could simply deny this sort of an application, but there must be a process.
I'll try my hand at this one. So just to add to what Catherine is saying is that if there was a procedural issue that somebody in the public had concern with, they could apply to the Court of Queen's Bench for a judicial review. So they would have to, they don't have to prove there was a procedural issue, but they can file to the court to prove their case.
But that would be the basis, not that they just don't like the purpose to
Correct.
which the funds are going.
Correct, yes.
It has to be
They'd
a
have-
procedural application.
Correct.
Right, thank you. Councillor Russell? Are there any other questions then for Ms. Van Kampima at this time? Seeing none, thanks for your presentation.
Thank you.
With that, I will move the council give first reading to the CCHC Construction Loan Guarantee Bylaw 2017-23. Councillor Krausert.
Your worship, I'd like to propose an amendment to the bylaw, please. Thank you. So Ms. Van Kampima referenced 3.1 and 3.3. Respectfully, I disagree that the wording should stand as is. It's the town that's providing the guarantee. The last of the preamble says, now therefore the council of the town of Canmore and the province of Alberta duly assembled enact. So the town is, or council is making these decisions. And so it reads better, and I think is more accurate, that 3.1 and 3.3 change, that where it says council, it should say the town of Canmore. So 3.1 would read, subject to the provisions and limitations in here, the town of Canmore is hereby authorized to guarantee 35% of the indebtedness of CCHC. And in 3.3, the town of Canmore shall not guarantee Canmore CCHC's indebtedness beyond the earlier date. Council is not a legal entity that can provide a guarantee, and while it does speak on behalf of the town, it is actually the town that is being authorized to provide the guarantee by this enactment, if it's passed. So I would ask you to support that amendment.
Thank you, Councillor. Given the response to the question I'd asked, I have no problem supporting the amendment. It's supportable. Any other discussion on the amending motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question on the amendment then. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. Back then to the main motion as amended, that council give first reading of the CCHC Construction Loan Guarantee Bylaw 2017-23 as amended. Discussion on that motion. Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. Thank you very much for all the work. I have to ask, do you have somebody new in the finance department that's got all this, graphic skill? Your slides have got a whole lot more graphics going on. They're happy, they're cheery, I like it.
Teacher as well.
Yes, exactly.
So we'll take a short break before we move into the next item of business. 10 minutes. Back in here for 7:15 on that clock. call the meeting back to order and move on to item G1, capital budget request for an aerial platform-mounted thermal imaging camera. Mr. Gill, and I promised Mr. Gill that I would hold the dogs off him. This is his first time presenting to council. So you people go gently on him.
Yes, it is. Really? Yeah, it sure is. Yeah.
Mr. Gill, the podium is yours.
Good evening, Mayor Borman and members of council. I'm here before you to request an amendment to Capital Project 1607. Capital Project 1607, thermal imaging cameras for $54,000 was approved as part of the 2016 budget. We had 9 vendors respond to the RFP with the projects ranging from $26,500 to $53,600. The successful vendors project tally was $26,556. Administration is proposing the remaining funds be used to purchase an aerial platform-mounted thermal imaging camera. This camera would have similar capabilities to a handheld thermal imaging camera, but it would be mounted to the underside of the aerial platform on our Bronto apparatus and wirelessly linked to the portable display. This high elevation perspective would give a better situational awareness to fire ground incident command and allow to more efficiently identify and target hotspots and hidden voids in rooftops. Done some research into the camera, and the estimated cost would be $10,000 to $15,000. There is currently $27,444 remaining in Capital Project 1607. Therefore, no additional capital financial impacts are expected. That brings me to the end of the presentation and open for questions.
Thank you very much. That was brief, to the point. Perfectly well done. Are there any questions then from council? Councilor McCallum.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you for your presentation, Mr. Gill. I was wondering if you could tell me what the expected life of such an imaging camera would be.
Well, the life of the imaging camera would be dependent on what it's exposed to. If there's not much exposure, it is a NFPA rated 1801 camera, which is subject to heat and other stresses, but the camera would be subject to what we would expose it to, really.
Right.
So if it was kept fairly safe, it would be probably good for 10 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool, thanks.
Councillor Russell.
Thank you. Deputy Chief Gill, question. First off, that's quite a substantial drop in price to come from a $54,000 budget down to 26. Did we get a good deal?
Yeah, we had the 9 vendors and we put them through a matrix, and the matrix scores them objectively. The vendor that was successful met all the requirements and exceeded in some of them, especially in price.
So did we buy this? So we've bought different cameras than what we previously had?
That's correct. Yeah, previously we had MSA cameras, and we just purchased FLIR cameras.
Okay, because I remember at one point the conversation was that the pre-existing equipment was going to be kept to facilitate training, but would that still be valid? Would that still be valid, the training function, if they're training on the MSA, but they're actually working with the FLIR?
That's correct, yeah.
That would still be valid training?
Yes, yes it would.
Excellent, and so if I heard you correctly, the boom-mounted camera is going to be about 10? Was that?
About, sorry?
About 10,000 you said?
$10,000 to $15,000.
But it'll be the similar process, go out and see who's got what and bring
That's
it in?
correct.
Thank you.
Councillor Comfort.
My question was answered.
Are there other questions? Councillor Sanford.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Mr. Gill, for your presentation. With the boom-mounted camera, what is the procedure for doing that? Do you do it? Do you mount the camera when you're out in the event, or?
No, the camera would be permanently mounted to the bottom of the platform.
Okay, so that's going to take a fair amount of wear and tear, then, is it? Because it's indoors, outdoors. It's on the vehicle the whole time.
That's correct. Yeah, it's designed to be quite robust.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then for the battery, is there a battery component to it that
it would be hardwired into the truck.
Oh, okay. All right. And then it's sending an image through Wi-Fi back to the command center.
That's correct.
Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I was
Not
just-
through Wi-Fi, but it'll be a wireless connection.
Oh, okay. A wireless connection.
There's no internet involved.
Okay. So how do you do a wireless connection from the fire truck?
It'd be an antenna with a power source, which would send the
Oh,
information
okay.
down to a screen.
Okay. So that's what I was just trying to imagine is how this would be rigged into the platform, but you've explained it, so thank you.
You're welcome. Oh. This is the camera that we just bought. We bought these cameras, and the other camera would be similar to this, but function as a permanent camera, which would be attached to the bottom of the platform.
Well, thank you very much. I don't see any other questions. Nice to have the prop there. Good thing somebody reminded me. There are no further questions. Seeing none, thanks very much, Deputy Chief Gill.
You're welcome.
That I will move the council approve the use of unused budget from Capital Project 1607 to purchase a platform-mounted thermal imaging camera. Discussion on the motion. Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor, opposed, motion's carried unanimously. First appearance before council, that's perfect.
Sorry? Oh, for sure.
Just wants to touch it. You should take a selfie with it, Ed. Not allowed,
Okay. That was fun. Thanks for bringing that to show and tell. Oh. Okay. If I could, I'd like to finish this meeting. There's one item left, item G2, 2017 municipal election process approvals. Ms. Hyde.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. So I feel bad. I don't have a prop.
No props?
I don't have a fancy presentation. It's not my first presentation. I'm not your favorite department.
Yeah, right.
It's planning.
There's room.
For improvement.
You can work on it.
All right, I'm
Chocolate would
going to
help,
do my
yeah.
best here. See if I can make up for my shortfalls here. This evening, we are going to talk about the 2017 municipal election, and there are a few procedural items that we require annual approval from council for to start running the election. So the first thing will be to appoint the returning officer. So I hope that you will pick me. The CAO has offered to act in the event that I'm unable to carry out my duties. The second part is to authorize, these are all things that improve accessibility to the vote, and they're at the discretion of council. So the MGA only requires us to hold a general election. So everything else is at your discretion. The advance vote, the ability for people who can't leave their home to vote from home, the provision of special ballots, which is what the MGA calls in mail-in ballots, and an agreement to help the school board with their election. And the last thing I have on my report to discuss today is whether or not we want to look at campaign signage on public property. So I was just going to talk a little bit about the extra opportunities for voting. So I was just going to talk a little bit about advanced voting because I get a lot of questions about why we wait to hold it, why we don't hold it right after nomination day. And it really has to do with when nomination day really does close and when we can reasonably expect our ballots to arrive. So if you look at this, nomination day is on September 18th, and then candidates have 24 hours to withdraw. So nomination day ends at noon, so the earliest we could possibly order the ballots would be noon on September 19th, the following day. If the number of candidates received doesn't equal the number of offices that are available, we can keep holding nomination day every day until the following Monday. So it actually happens if we're assisting the school board. So it hasn't happened in my experience with a council, but it has happened with school boards not having enough vacancies to fill their position. So we wait for them, if that's the case.
Nominees to fill positions.
Yeah, so whichever comes first, getting enough candidates to fill the position or the following Monday is when the nominations will officially close. So keeping that in mind and looking at advertising requirements for the advance election, really the yellow period, October 5th is about the first day that we could, with confidence, predict that we could start holding the advance vote. So you're only required to permit me to hold one, and after that I can decide how many and when they're going to be. This year we're looking at, just in case you're interested, we're looking at holding quite a few. So maybe even the whole week preceding and into the Thanksgiving weekend to get, last time we had a lot of comments that kids in university come home over the Thanksgiving long weekend, so we'd like to provide that opportunity for them. So we are looking at really expanding our offerings this year. You only have to authorize me to hold one. Incapacitated to vote at home, I think you're probably all familiar with. This is for people that can't leave their home to vote. They have to register ahead of time, so we advertise that. The MGA authorizes us to hold it on the advance vote day closest to the election, which has worked well in the past, and then we have to be able to send 2 election workers to the home at that time to take the vote. The reason we don't like to hold it on election day is it's hard to spare the 2 election workers. It can come down to just a sort of a resource thing. Special ballots we've never done before. So and I personally as a returning officer have never done them before either, so I've been leaning on some of my other clerk colleagues out in the world. The town of Canmore provided me with an example of the town of Cochrane supplied me an example of what they do. So with the special ballots, you have to apply, and the MGA sets out the form of the application. And I, as the returning officer, then have to maintain a special ballot register that any candidate can ask to look at. Then the elector, who's ordered the ballot, is responsible for making sure they do the whole thing correctly and for making sure the ballot arrives before close of election. So they don't have to mail it back. They can get someone to drop it off, as long as it gets back to me and is in the proper form. And one of the councillors had been asking if I could just show a quick demonstration of what they look like, so I hope this is not awkward, but if you ordered one, you would get this giant envelope in the mail. And inside the giant envelope would be, this thing would be your instructions, and then you'd get a ballot. And there'd be instruction there how to fill out your ballot. So you can vote up to 6 positions for councillor, 1 for mayor, and then whatever the school board election may or may not be. Once you're finished filling out your ballot, you have to put it in this and seal it. This then goes inside this. So you're all familiar when you vote that you fill out the Form 8, the voting register. It's printed right on the envelope. The people have to fill that out correctly. Your ballot goes inside. You seal that, and then you have to attach a copy of a valid piece of identification to this. And you put it, once you've got that all together, you put it back in the stamped envelope that we sent you. Does anybody remember SAZES? Self-addressed stamped envelopes? SAZES. And you send it back to me in your stamped envelope. When I receive it, we open it up. If the ID is valid, we destroy it. This is valid, we take the ballot out, we don't open it. This goes in a box. This goes in a file that we will put with all the rest of the Form 8s that we get during the election. And then at the close of election, I will open the ballot box and open these ballots. So all the process is to make sure, A, that we preserve, we know how many ballots are going out and coming back in, that's the register, but we also want to preserve as closely as possible the anonymity of the vote as well, which is why everything has to be on the outside and we separate it ahead of time before we look at the ballot.
So you indicated you'd spoke with the clerk of the town, City of Cochrane?
Cochrane, yeah.
Had there been any example of somebody saying, well, I mailed the darn thing, and the clerk saying, well, we never got it, and then what happens there?
If you don't receive it before close of the polls, it doesn't count. But Cochrane says they've only done it for the last 2 elections. So they did 13 mail-in ballots the first time they tried it, and then they did 27 in the last election, which they thought was actually really great. And they said they didn't have any problem with anything coming after the day. And they make every effort to get them out as quickly as possible too, right?
And is there an indication on all of the information as to when the last date should be? I mean, in order to get in time, it should be mailed by this date? Is that clear on the instructions?
Yes. However, talking to Canmore, they've gone to Town of Cochrane, sorry. They've gone to great effort to help people get their ballots back in, whether it's courier or people picking them up, or like their whole philosophy is to make the vote as accessible as possible, and they really do go out of their way to make sure that people are assisted and the process works. And I am inspired by them, and I intend to do the same thing. So I hope it works. Like, it would be sad if someone didn't come in on time, but we'll have to take the chance, I think.
Sure. Councillor Krausert, do you have a question?
Yeah, on this. Thanks for looking into that. I had a couple questions on this. Because it's a mail and potentially mail back, and you had mentioned earlier about there's a certain period of time when you have to order the ballots. It's not necessarily the same ballot, is it? Or
no, there's a pretty strict control on it, but we can have access to a print-on-demand ballot. That access would be very restricted to just me.
So that it can actually get out very soon after nomination.
As soon as we know who the candidates are.
And is there some sort of a check in place at the voting station to ensure that there's somebody who's got a special ballot doesn't in fact show up in person?
It's on our system, but we have all the voting registers. So if I had reason to believe that I'd seen a person's mail-in ballot, because I'll have seen all these Form 8s as they come in, and if I see that person at the voting station, I could question it right away, but it really is on our system. Honestly, if none of us know you when you requested a mail-in ballot and then you came in, and you have to swear the affidavit both times, right? So you have to be willing to commit the election fraud. Hope to get away with it for your one vote. Yeah.
Okay.
That it?
Carry on.
And the last thing I just wanted to touch on was school board elections. So we have the Canadian Rockies Regional Division and the Catholic School Board, who we assist with their trustee elections. Councillor Sanford, you'd asked about the French school. They don't have a school board. They have a parent, some kind of parent, I think they vote amongst themselves for the board that runs them. It's not a province-wide vote. Yeah, so if these boards require elections, we partner with them and put their names on the ballots.
So that might answer my question, 'cause I don't recall seeing a Catholic school trustee name on the ballot in the past, and maybe it's...
They've always been acclaimed in my...
Came in by acclamation.
Yep. As long as, I think even Suzette has been doing it, they've been acclaimed.
Okay.
But were they to need one?
Pardon me?
If they needed one,
Sure.
we would help them out.
Do you have any questions on that? Councillor Sanford?
Thank you, Worship. My other question was, do people have to show ID when they vote?
Yes.
Okay, so they have to show ID and swear the affidavit.
Yes.
So you've got a copy of their ID on that mail-in ballot, but they also have to show ID.
Yes, and the copy that comes in the mail ballot, though, I look at it, and if I'm satisfied, I destroy it.
Right.
Same at the election, we don't keep anybody's
Okay.
ID or copies of ID.
Okay, so in both cases, there has to be some ID presented or mailed in?
Yeah.
I had another question about the incapacitated elector at home voting. What category would Origin fall under? Would they be institutional or if there was people living at Origin that couldn't make it to the ballot?
Yeah, we would go to their home. So the institutional locations are set by bylaw, which I was going to touch on later in the presentation, but we have a bylaw that allocates the lodge and the hospital as institutional voting stations. So somewhere like Origins, we could talk about if they had enough for us to set up a voting station there, enough people that couldn't leave.
Okay. Well,
it's a possibility.
Because there's a lot of people living there.
But we would also, if no voting station, we just go to their home. Some people can't actually leave their beds. So you would attend right to their bed.
Okay,
Yeah.
great, thanks.
So you have more presentation, or, because there's other questions apparently?
No, I think I have like one more slide.
Well, let's get through the one more slide and then go to questions.
I just had
Yeah.
something on what we were just talking about.
I was just going to touch on, if we share the election with the school board, they pay a portion of the cost. So typically, if it's just us and Canadian Rockies School Division, they pay 50%. And then I was just going to touch on, this is not a thing we usually look at as an annual approval. This is about campaign signs on public property. So this is permitted by the town's land use bylaw. And if council had an appetite to talk about changing the regulation, we would have to bring you a land use amending bylaw, which would come along with a public hearing, like all land use amending bylaws. So today's question is not whether or not you support campaign signs on public property, it's whether or not you'd like to discuss it further in a bylaw situation and go to a public hearing. I just want to be clear on that one. And then I just wanted to touch briefly, sorry, I had 2 more slides, on just for your own information, the bylaws that we have in effect that just carry on from election to election. So we have one bylaw that allows us to use those electronic vote tabulators. We have an election ballot bylaw that authorizes us to rotate the ballots. So that's when each of the candidates' names appears on the top of the list one time. And then we have a candidate nomination bylaw that sets out, instead of 5 signatures on your nomination form as set out in the MGA, you require 25, and we require a $100 deposit to come with a nomination paper. So council always has the prerogative to change any of those bylaws, but I haven't brought them forward with any recommendations. And this is the recommendation from the staff report. And that's my presentation.
Thank you. Councillor McCallum.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you for your presentation, Ms. Hyde. I'd like you to be our returning officer, too.
Thanks.
So I just wanted to pick up off what was actually a question I had with regards to the institutional ballot, institutional voting, that we might want to consider reaching out to the other senior citizen center now we have, or at Origins. Because I would say that the door count there is similar to the lodge.
I will phone them.
So we might want to look into that at least. And then my other question is, in the town of Banff, what is it the signs on public property in Banff, is that just not done, or is that entrenched in legislation?
No, it's not. As far as I know, it's been a while since I've been there, but they don't permit signs on public property at all, any kind of signs, campaign signs, or
Any
other
signs,
signs.
yeah,
But
for
they
sure.
do permit signs on private property. Yeah.
Perfect.
And that's
Thank you.
within their land use bylaw or something.
That's in their land use bylaw.
Yeah.
Yep.
Thank you.
Councillor Seeley.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thanks for your presentation, Ms. Hyde, and thanks for bringing all the props. I thought those were awesome.
Thanks. Thanks for saying so.
Props.
I do have a concern with the mail-in ballots, though. So you can mail in a ballot, and
Yep.
you destroy who sends that in. So you have no cross-reference. Someone could do that and then come in and vote.
All right.
Is there a way that you could hold that information so that you can cross-reference?
We do. We keep the voting register. It's the ID that we don't keep.
Okay.
So we keep this, and you'll see when you vote, and you probably remember, there's stacks of these. They're just white, right? They're
Okay,
not
yeah.
envelopes. We
Yeah.
have stacks of them. So theoretically, and we keep those for 6 weeks after the election, if
Okay.
there's any kind of concern, we can go through them.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Councillor Krausert.
Your Worship. Ms. Hyde, I have a question that you, or perhaps some of your colleagues, could answer with regards to timing in looking at the signage question.
Right.
So I would think that, so just bear with me here.
Yeah.
Working backwards, I would think that if we're going to be fair for all potential candidates, we would have to deal with this if it was ever to go through by our last meeting before the summer breaks, beginning of July, because people would be ordering signage and all that
Yes.
stuff through the summer. we'd have to have a public hearing. That puts us probably at the latest at mid-June in order to respond to that and get a report out, and there has to be advertising for that. So that means that probably the latest would be the second council meeting in May, but the agenda package has to be done before that, so really having it done by the end of April. And given the workloads, is this realistic that we can do that?
Mr. Soto.
So the reason we brought this request is because we didn't want to do that work if council had no interest in pursuing it, or the majority of council had no interest in pursuing it. However, Ms. Hyde has suggested that we do not have to give this to the planning department. This is an amending bylaw that she can craft and bring forward. So the workload in planning would not be impacted.
Okay, so it is doable if council supports venturing down that. Okay,
Yeah.
Can I just jump in on that? So it would, given the timeline that Councillor Krauser just described, would have to come forward likely as an independent amendment to the land use bylaw. It couldn't be part of the...
Right, there would be no omnibus
so we'd
bylaw.
have a public hearing on that one change.
Right.
Well, and I should have mentioned that actually, due to the staffing changes in planning and development, the omnibus bylaw has been delayed. So I think it was part of that list.
So that is why we're bringing it as an independent motion.
Okay, it's good to understand that. Thank you. Councillor Krauser, did you have other questions? Are there other questions from other councillors? I had a question around the advanced polling. So you don't anticipate council directing you as to how many advanced polls or the scheduling of? We're just going to let you make your own decision.
Would you like to have some input on that?
Well, I would like to see us...
Not averse.
I mean, and I don't know if I guess that's the question. If we just talk about it a bit, that might give you all the direction you need, but I think your idea of having an advanced poll every day through that available period is a good suggestion if it's feasible. I don't know if anybody else wants to weigh in on that. I don't think we need to make it part of the motion, but I think the more advanced polling we can do, given the nature of our voters that travel quite a bit.
Yep.
And I spoke with quite a number of people the last election who just weren't able to coordinate their traveling schedule with the, I think, 2 advanced polls or whatever it was. So just take that as
I appreciate it.
More the better. Okay. Councillor Sanford.
Thank you, Worship. More on the advance poll, would you be able to run it for the regular poll time, or would it be a shortened amount of time if you did it for a number of days?
The advance poll is up to us.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think we actually ran 3 the last time, and we did 2 during the day and 1 in the evening.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I just wouldn't want to get people too confused about the times, you know?
Yeah, I think it should be consistent and maybe I was thinking of some early mornings because I received some requests for that the last time. We didn't have very many people show up at the evening one, so I don't know if it was the wrong evening or just evenings are bad, but I think we should still have one. And then I think the really important one is the Saturday of the long weekend.
Okay, I think that's a great idea to have.
Yeah,
more
but I
options for
appreciate that.
people.
Yeah, I think having a consistent time. The poll will be open every day between 8 and 4 or whatever it happens to be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I hope you have the resources for that.
Well, you need 2 people.
Yeah.
Every time, so I'll be hiring some election workers as well.
If you like, you could set the advance poll up in the mayor's office and I could help you out with that.
I was thinking the classroom.
Okay, are there any other questions at this time? See none? Thanks very much. So there's 2 suggested motions. I'll put them forward separately. First motion is that council approve the 2017 municipal election process as presented in attachment 1. So discussion on the motion. Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. And then to generate some discussion, I'll move that the council direct administration to return with an amendment to the land use bylaw to prohibit, I'm going to change the motion a little bit, to prohibit or limit the placement of campaign signs on public property. So the motion I'm putting forward is just like that, but it says to prohibit or limit.
Poached my amendment.
Did I?
Yep.
I wonder why. So that's the motion that's on the table. Is there discussion to that motion? Councillor McCallum?
Thank you, Your Worship. We've been talking about campaign signs on public property for off and on for a couple of years now. And it's certainly something that I've heard a lot from people in the community at various times, generally when there's an election, whether it's federal or provincial or municipal. I think that the word that comes to mind mostly is not necessarily about aesthetics, but it's about the waste. And I think that right now that we have room to debate on whether the town should continue on with the full practice of signs on public property, or if we should look at the kind of community we are and the values that we collectively hold, and decide on whether we want to limit the number of signs that are placed on public property. There was a time where I think I sort of considered the idea of a full-out ban, but as I've done some more research, I'm actually surprised as to the number of municipalities that do have a full-out ban. And then I am impressed with the municipalities that have come forward with sort of a halfway meeting point. So I actually went online last night and was surprised. So Banff, as we know, our neighbor, has a ban on election signs on public property. Windsor, Mississauga, Vaughan, Burlington, Cornwall, Regina, Barrie, Hamilton, Sarnia, Strathcona County, London, Ontario, Halifax, Prince George, Kirkland Lake, Milton, Oshawa, Richmond, Kingston, Oakville, Caledon. Those are the ones that I could find within a quick 20-minute Google search. And municipalities that have actual location restrictions. Vancouver, Victoria, Edmonton, Port Coquitlam, and Winnipeg. And then municipalities that require a permit and a deposit requirement if you're going to put signs on public property, Whistler and Toronto. And then these are the ones that I thought were kind of creative. Municipalities with a number of signs limited on public property. So Terrace in particular allows, I believe, for 6, and Quesnel allows for 30. So quite a range, and both communities are in similar size of each other, actually. So I think that it's something that we should at least consider. I think we have the ability through a public hearing to hear from the public as to what they think about it. I also noted that in some municipalities they actually ban signs from anyone other than a registered candidate, which is interesting as well. So that means that you couldn't put up signs and be anonymous to endorse one candidate over another, which is, again, interesting. But I think it's at least worth considering. And that's my pitch.
Councillor Russell.
I guess that was my first question is limit. Councillor McCollum has put out a couple of examples, but that creates an enforcement burden of someone walking around counting signs.
Depends on how the land use bylaw is worded.
I'm just throwing it out there.
Yeah, sure. So admin, if that was the motion that was approved, and it could be amended, they would bring suggestions, and that would be the discussion. Did you have another question?
No, that was my first one. I'll be listening.
Councillor Stanford.
Thank you, Your Worship. To prohibit or limit, that would be the kind of turning point of determining whether this is something that could be enforced, to Councillor Russell's point, and crafting the bylaw. I mean, the bylaw would have to consider how to frame that. And taking into consideration that nomination day is September 18th, we have 4 weeks of potentially looking at campaign signage. And I don't see it as a big problem. I don't know that we want to expend a lot of resources to solve a problem that in the past I don't think has been a huge problem. I think what candidates need to be made aware of is the size that signage is allowed to be on public property, because that is determined in our election bylaw, and candidates should research that. But you know, we are a small town, and I think it's important for people to know that there is an election coming, and campaign signage is traditionally a way that this community communicates people's intention and seriousness about running for council. And I know that we've done this for, you know, I've observed this for many years. I think it's a way for people to give each other awareness of the democratic process and to educate themselves on what it takes to elect a council and what you need to know about electing a council. So election signage is just one avenue of information that people can get. I know that many of us are quite good with social media, and some people are, some people aren't. So that is another avenue that people can use to educate each other. But I think campaign signage is something that in our community has been effective, and in fact the placement and design of a campaign signage says a lot about the candidate, in my opinion. So how people choose to communicate their campaign is also something that people can evaluate. So I think campaign signage is a good tool, and I don't really want to see a whole lot of time expended in removing it or limiting it, because it's a very short period of time, and it's a 4-year cycle we're on. So I won't support the recommendation of removing the signage.
Councillor Cressert?
Thank you, Worship. I'd like to propose an amendment. I am concerned about the timing for this, and so my amendment is just to tack on to the end of the motion for council's consideration by May 7th. What did I put, May 16th or 17th? May 16th, 2017. If this is going to be dealt with in the manner that it needs to be in order for candidates to respond to whatever is the result, it needs to be done before council summer break, and I think that this can't come back any later than this, so I'd want to see this as part of the motion. I don't know what I'm going to vote on the main motion yet, but this is important to be in there if I was to support it.
Okay. I could just accept that as a friendly amendment.
If you'd like to do that, then that's fine.
Yeah, I'll accept that as a friendly amendment. So then, speaking to the motion that was on the overhead as amended, Councillor Seeley.
I'm really struggling with this one. I understand the intent, but we are getting pretty close to an election. And I think limiting signage helps me a little bit, but I'm not really leaning towards limiting or eliminating it, because I think as incumbents we could have an unfair advantage, and I think as a good council we would like to encourage people who run, and public property certainly is an advantage for those who aren't incumbents, and you know, I'd like to build the strongest council that we can and be encouraging for that, and I don't think this does that.
So I'm hearing that as speaking against the motion?
Yes.
Councillor Comfort?
Yeah, I'm exactly divided on this one, exactly in half. So I respect Councillor McCallum's intent of this, given the signs that become orphaned, the amount of work that goes into replacing them after they've been kicked over or taken away, all of that nonsense that goes on, the sign wars. On the other hand, I think it is a great way for people to get their name out there in front of the public. The incumbents do have, all those statistics show, a big advantage over newcomers, especially after a 4-year term versus a 3-year term. So I could really easily argue both sides. And I'm curious, so my understanding is this would have to go to a public hearing. And I'm curious to hear from the public about what they would like to see. And I think that would drive my decision to a large degree. So
I'm hearing you may support the motion.
I think I'm going to support the motion in order to go to public hearing.
Okay. I'll speak to the motion. This time, in some ways, I'm ambivalent, but it is something that we've talked about in a loose way for several years, actually. From my own experience, so I've run in 4 elections now, run 4 campaigns, and the first 2 were for a councillor seat, and I didn't use any signs, and that was intentional because as a resident, I always found the sign pollution to be offensive. I didn't like all those signs everywhere. And I've always thought that signs on private property were far more meaningful, and if the candidate is gathering support for their campaign, people will take signs for their lawn. So from that perspective, the name recognition is out there. Now, when I ran the second 2 times for the mayor's seat, I did take a different approach, and I did use campaign signs, which is why I'm sort of ambivalent on this. But I think we should, I mean, I'll support the motion because I would like to bring this to a head, and I think it is something that we could talk about as a community. And I appreciate Councillor Krauser's amendment to make certain that this would be done in a timely fashion. Councillor McCallum.
Thank you. All interesting arguments that I have considered. I don't think that the cost of signs, actually, let me rewind. When I first moved to this community in 1999, signs never happened except in a provincial or federal election. Municipally, they rarely happened. And then they started happening, and I want to say it was like 2004, maybe 2007, where it really started to ramp up. And then I saw the sheer number of signs in 2010. And I've been hammering in signs, campaign signs, since I was 12 years old. I know what sign wars are all about. I have orchestrated them. And in the end of the day, sign wars aren't about the electorate. They are about who is being elected. It is a mental game. And so I have different thoughts about this, but I feel like the cost of signs, I know the cost of signs could preclude a really great candidate from considering to run. And so therefore, then we are basically in our small town underpinning the idea that only elites can run. And I don't like that. I think that if we want to talk about getting our name out to the electorate, that's what knocking on doors and going to our forums and talking to constituents is about. And I actually think that allowing signs on public property doesn't actually help a new candidate, it hinders, because it basically reinforces name recognition amongst those who are already out there. So I see this as, people place a lot more weight on campaign signs that are on private property than they do on public. I have seen elections where somebody's had a lot of money and they put a lot of campaign signs out there on public property and they did not make it in the top 6, never mind the top 10. So I just think that the amount of waste, the amount of garbage that goes in our landfill as a result, if we want to talk about enforcement for our bylaw folks, they're already enforcing where they're being hammered into public property because they can't be near crosswalks or near certain signage or attached to certain signage. I would say that it keeps our solid waste services folks busy because they are picking them out of the garbage can to try and recycle them. And I would also note that it keeps our parks folks busy when they're yanking them out of ditches as well, when they're taking care of our lawns and grass. So, I don't know, I just thought that it would be a good time to consider this as a council, to look forward, to be modern in our election process. And I'm kind of disappointed that it's come forward here, because I've been asking for this to come forward to council for 2.5 years. And now we're talking about timing when we asked this to come forward quite a few years ago when we were doing our first round of land use bylaw amendments. So that's all I got to say.
I'll take that as
Support
for the motion.
Absolutely.
Councillor Krausert, no, sorry, Councillor Russell.
Thank you. Really appreciate the discussion. I guess I must travel in different circles because I've never heard a lot of major complaining about pollution or garbage, and given the cost of signs, personally, mine have seen multiple use, and I suspect people who are somewhat serious would be keeping that. So, and to turn this in now, we should have maybe addressed this 3 years ago. I think it was actually 3.5, not 2.5, but maybe it should have been addressed then. But now that we're going to just jam this in, and I feel like we're jamming it in, it's not that big of a deal. It's a 1-month period. It's a 1-month period. I have to agree with Councillor Sanford on that one. And I think it's just a matter of absolutely, it gets tedious when you get everybody builds that big circle around, but for people, some people have to take that to get their name out, and I'm not sure that we're benefiting anybody by restricting that access to signage. So no, I can't support this at this time.
Councillor Krausert.
Thank you, Your Worship. You know, I can see arguments on both sides. I certainly have been a fan of using signs myself. That said, I always had a personal objective to have at least as many signs on private property as I do on public property, and try to have more on private property, because I think that that's actually the more valuable sign placement actually. But I do see arguments against. Not once during elections have I heard somebody say, I love seeing all the signs. I've heard quite the opposite. I've actually had people complaining about signage. Ironically, the biggest complaint that I've received with regards to signage was along a trail by the river, and the sign was actually on private property. So I don't know how I would ultimately vote when this comes back, and I would like to hear the public. But of course, we're not being asked to vote for or against prohibiting it now. We're being asked whether we want to ask the question. And I'm supportive of asking the question, so I'll support this motion.
Councillor Sanford.
Thank you, Your Worship. I know that Councillor McCallum is very passionate about this subject because she has been speaking about it for many years, and I know that she has been looking for the best opportunity to bring this forward, and I don't doubt that. I know that philosophically it's a very important issue for her, and I respect that. In terms of the elites having a better opportunity to put signage out in the community, I would argue that if you've lived in this community for a long time, your friends live in all the best places to put signs. So essentially, the long-term people are going to always have a more favorable opportunity to put their name out there, because we can strategically locate where we want our signs to be and approach our friends. In fact, I honestly have not heard any complaints about campaign signage in the past. And the thing that I have heard from people when I bump into them in the grocery stores, can I have one of your signs? You know, can you give me one of your signs? I'll put it on my house. And so that's the kind of thing that I think people value, because when they ask that sort of question, they want to be able to promote the candidate that they favor as well. So I feel more elite having lived in this community for a long time, because I know those people, and I can put way more campaign signage on private property than than a new person that came to Canmore a year ago or 2 years ago. But I still think that person has a good chance and should take a good opportunity to run for council. So I don't want to see newcomers being disadvantaged by this. If it's something people don't want to do, fine. But I think that we should give people the option to make their name known and to make their views known.
Just in the spirit of debate, so the possibility would exist, I suppose, of change limiting the number of signs on public property, not eliminating them, so that rather than 7 or 8 or 12 of one candidate sign in one location, you might see one. And that is something that I've seen in past campaigns where there's more than one sign from one candidate in one location. Just in the spirit of debate. Did you have something else? Just your names on.
I need to clarify myself. When I'm speaking of new people, I'm not speaking of new people to town. I'm speaking of new people who want to run for council, who may not have the financial resources to back a campaign. And I've seen what the results of our financial statements have been over the last 2 campaigns, and that cost is anywhere between $3,000 to $5,000, and that can be pretty inhibiting in a community as expensive as this, in a position that is a part-time paid and a full-time run position. So that was the only thing I was wanting to clarify.
Is there any further discussion on the motion, which is shown on the overhead as number 2? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried with Councillors Russell, Sanford, and Sealy in opposition. So we will have something back to council by the 16th of May for council to consider, and if there's an approval, then it would go to a public hearing. And I believe that brings us to the end of this agenda. I'll move the council be adjourned. Those in favor, we're adjourned.